Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, joined today by Kingpilled to revisit a hypothesis he set forth some time back. He talked with us, with me, on this channel about it about 5 months ago, but he was talking about it some months before that. That's how I first heard about him. Shout out again to Mr. Pete Quinones, through whose channel I first found out about Matt. And yeah, definitely check out Pete's stuff because, you find out about great people, great ideas, and great old books over there. Before I jump in, please do buy my books. There's Vinculum, science fiction book set in Istanbul in the year 2076, a bit of a dystopian cyberpunk type thing. You'll see links for it in the description below. There's also my collection of poetry, Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. You can find that on Amazon too, links below. And thank you to my channel supporters, all of the credit and none of the blame. Over this last year and a half, I have not produced as much content. I was on a bride quest, and I found the bride and brought her back from the old country. No yellow fever, ladies and gentlemen. I found a European bride, and so I've been absorbed in quite a bit of all the things that are attendant upon that. So please forgive me again. Thanks to my supporters who have stuck with me in the meantime. I expect that there's going to be quite a bit more content on the way. So Matt is here with us. Last time he was on the channel, I was under a capricious and arbitrary YouTube interdiction. However, that has now changed, and I'm able to post links. Please reference the links to his YouTube channel and his Twitter, which are available down below. Matt, thanks very much for joining us. Can you just introduce yourself very quickly for anyone who might have not caught that past stream or might not be familiar with you?
Yeah, I am Matt. I am the face of Kingpilled. It's a YouTube channel and a podcast, and then on the YouTube channel, I do a daily stream called the Astrolabe, which is 2 to 3 hours every morning, going through top news stories of the day, funny videos that I saw, interesting Twitter threads that I stumbled across. Sometimes we read some articles or some Substacks, and it's basically just all the stuff that I'm interested in right now. So that's and then I'm on Twitter at Real Kingpilled, and I'm pretty active there as well. So I guess I'm one of these, whatever the people have called it, new right or dissident right or NRX, or there's been a whole bunch of different names as we've sort of waffled our way through looking for a new identity. And I've been one of the pieces floating around in that soup.
Right on. Well, again, thank you very, very much for coming on. I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward very much to this discussion. Sorry, I just saw a comment from Charlemagne. Yeah, I calculated the additional expenditure for butter. She's French, and as a consequence, she cooks everything with butter, and it comes to roughly an additional $1,000 per year. Just on butter. So yeah, this is
you married well.
This shit is serious. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for everyone with the kind words in the chat. So jumping in with Matt, I just want to say at the outset, he came in with this hypothesis, as I said, some months back, and Matt is probably going to want to say a few things just to sort of cover what this basic idea is, again, for those who have not seen the original episode. It's only a few episodes back in the chain of them on my channel, so you can find it there. It's it's basically titled the same thing, different thumbnail for it, an emerging counter elite. And he talked about, generational transitions that are coming in, transitions that entail a shift in power, as well as a shift in attitudes. He has also talked about things like, our tech lord counter elites saying, competency is a basic civilizational requirement. He had a lot to say about how you can dispense with the idea that the people would have to be unified by ideology, simply because if we do accept our own takes, along the lines of, reality is what it is, and you can't get around it. And ultimately, these ideologically driven people are going to come up against that hard wall. Then you would have to assume that the more intelligent among us, the more competent, would recognize that recognize the issues that face us, I should say, and want to do something about it, because there's, the entire system falls apart when it's increasingly overwhelmed by bio-Leninist incapacity. And along those lines, it was very interesting. I haven't seen all of it yet, but Dominique Cummings appeared from out of the blue, crawled out from whatever rock he was, relaxing beneath. And in an episode, it's just in the last day or so. Again, I haven't watched all of it, but there's this part where he talks about Elon Musk and some of the other people who are coming out of, what we call Silicon Valley, wherever it might be. It could be the damn, DC area tech corridor, for all I know. It's, but the people involved generally in that world. And he was discussing Musk and the rest of them, and he specifically framed things much in the way that Matt did months and months ago, which is that these people almost have had a gun put to their head, that despite whatever their own former backgrounds or whatever their backgrounds are or were, they recognize that they simply can't do what it is that they're driven to do and what business exigencies push them to do. And as a consequence, they've had to turn around and say that we're going to do something about that. Whatever you may think of Cummings, there's quite a bit to be said about him, not all of it good. I don't think anyone would doubt that he's dialed in and is a political player, even currently being out of favor, certainly able to read the board or read the map, as it were. And so basically the idea that Matt set forth is along these lines. I'm going to let him lay it out for you. But one last thing I do want to repeat that he had said that really struck me in our last discussion was, you can't really think of these people as blood and soil nationalists. You can't think of the kind of nationalism that we're seeing perhaps come into its own here. We can't even really think of that as nationalism in the way that we used to. That there are new groupings. It does seem to be, to some extent, I said this, but I think Matt agrees, that it is to some extent meritocratic and propositional. And it certainly has aspects of being territorial, but this is the expression Matt used I really liked. He said, think of it as though you've got people who want, on one side, you've got people who want America to exist because of Israel. And then you've got a whole nother group of people who say, America should exist and Israel should exist. And those two thoughts can exist simultaneously in their mind. And that's not to say that all of this is about Israel, but it is an interesting example to give of thinking on one subject that I think Matt is right about, that kind of frames what we're dealing with here. There are people who recognize, for a variety of reasons, that we cannot sweep away territory and intellectual property and military advantages, economic advantages. We can't sweep them entirely off the board and expect for anything to continue to function. Matt, how would you frame this general picture before we get into the things that have changed about it or the developments that have come into play?
First of all, I have to say, I really enjoy listening to you talk. I love the way you put ideas together, your grasp of the language. In the same way that you said before you're not gonna hump my leg too much, so I won't do too much to you either. But I've always talked about Yarvin. When I read Yarvin, like, irrespective of the actual things he's saying, there's an art to the way that the words are being put together and the way the ideas are being played around with. And I get a similar experience when I'm listening to you. That just I like the way you use words. So I think the big thing to see with this is, a regime is not a monolithic entity. A regime is a coalition of interests, and each of those interests has a reason why they want the regime to exist, and they want to exercise some control over it for their own unique interests. And they choose to compromise, whether even intentionally or just because they don't care, on a variety of other issues where they're willing to give up some sovereignty to gain the ends that they want. So maintaining a regime coalition is a delicate thing. you have to satisfy a lot of people's different interests. And when you're trying to put together a regime of people who are, for a variety of different reasons, focused on sowing degeneracy, then or not caring about sowing degeneracy in their pursuit of their ends, then that regime is going to have an expiration date, because eventually you're going to reach a point where different members of the coalition and the regime are going to reach an absolute impasse with one another. They cannot coexist together anymore because their ends are directly in opposition to one another. So by its nature, a regime like that's going to fracture. And all regimes eventually do fracture. There's lots of different types of regimes, and some of them are better than others. Some of them maintain coherence better than others. Some of them have longer tracks, but all of them are eventually going to break down and fracture. I believe this presuppositionally. So I was thinking in kind of these terms, and then I was also, sorry, I got a phone call coming in. I got to decline. I was thinking along these terms, and then also thinking about these generational cycles that people like to talk about. For example, the fourth turning is a really popular one. And people identify these, it seems like they run in anywhere from 70 to 100 years cyclically. And then you can break them down smaller and larger. And this actually gets at a lot of deeper esoteric truths as well. A lot of the ancient mystery cults and religions and stuff have all subscribed to these sort of cyclical patterns that happen through time. And in this sense, then you can have time that's both progressing forward linearly, but also cycling. So I'm looking at these different patterns, and there's all the patterns are all pointing to this time period. No matter what scale you want to go out, you can go out to thousands of year time cycles, and you could get down to intragenerational time cycles. But everything points to the 2025 to 2030, 2035 range as being a time of great transformation and revelation and upheaval and a regime turnover. So I was starting to look for the signs of that. I figured, okay, there's all these things that are pointing in this direction. It seems that we're at a time where Gen X is going to start becoming the predominant prevailing influence on the culture. And they're following in the footsteps of the boomers. There's lots of interesting things about the boomers. They're a very singular generation in terms of their role in world history and their impact on social trends. But they're beginning to decline, both in influence and literally they're dying off, which means that there's going to be new influences rising into the ascendancy. And these influences are not necessarily going to be ideologically beholden to the previous ones. And this now factors into this idea of the regime coalition. So that the regime is having to maintain a coalition of all these disparate interests while you're going through a bunch of generational turnover and a bunch of social cycle turnover. And then you've got built up debt and all these other economic reasons for it as well. But in looking at the social side of things, I said, okay, we're basically primed now for the rise of a counter elite. And what that counter elite is going to look like is members of the former elite who are going to become so disenchanted, so disenfranchised by their relationship with that elite that it's a simple transactional move. We're no longer gaining our interests. And in fact, we're beginning to lose a lot of our interests by being part of this coalition. So is there another game in town? And obviously there's another game in town that's very ready to appeal to the precise things that they seem to value. This was more of the abstract sort of social cycle level thinking that led me to, with the help of some friends pointing me in the right direction, to discovering what became now the big tech phenomenon, the big tech turning to Trump phenomenon.
But if I may be permitted a digression, you said earlier you like to listen to me talk, but I went back through the stream and I was like, God damn, man, I just need to shut up occasionally and let Matt talk. But I think I was interested in the last one because I was trying to find where your thinking and mine would mesh. Right. In this case, perhaps you'll forgive a digression, but I study nonlinguistic marking. So instead of thinking in terms of oral and literate, like Ong's big thesis, and the way people generally think about things, but prehistory is literally that period before we had writing and hence a record, right? So in looking at many different cultures, like for example, in the Caucasus, they use these clan signs that are called tamgas, and they appear on when someone stays in a guest room at someone's fortress or whatever, they'll carve their initials in the door, much like we today will sign a guest register. They mark the lintels of doorways. They mark boundary stones. They use them as property marks on equipment. In Galicia, there was another study a friend of mine did where he was looking at fishermen's marks, where they mark their oars, they mark their boats with these carved marks. And indeed, all across Europe, all across Central Asia, you see these types of marks in use. You can look at old, Bruegel pictures and see guys who are laboring under this big weight of something. They're porters carrying things, and you can see these little marks. We used to call them hallmarks, or in German they call them Hausmarken. The interesting thing about these marks that relates to what you were just saying about these generational cycles and the idea of a reset is specifically in the case, there's something like this with all of them. But in the case of the Galician fisherman's marks, my friend went out and he determined directly that what happens is you have this basic mark form. And then over time, as each generation comes, if you're the firstborn son, you take the family mark and you add a little thing to it. So it's the same mark, but it's got this little adjustment. If you're the youngest who stays with your parents when they're old and takes care of them in their old age, and presumably then inherits their house when they die, instead of going off into your own thing, you inherit the mark plain. But what happens, and this was explicitly laid out in my friend's paper, because he had talked to many of these old fishermen, is that there comes a time when these marks begin to get all these accretions with the additional elements that have been laid onto them. And roughly every 5 generations or so, which seems to be the phase of living memory for human beings prior to them introducing writing to give them more consistency across time, roughly within that 5 generational phase, what they do is they come in and they strip off the accretions of those marks, because those generations are gone, but it's still the same basic form. So you can show continuity with these previous, well, they're truly institutions, something that you raise that stands and stays, to institute. And something like that, I think, is going on here. Now, of course, you've got all the additional elements that come with highly literate culture and information technology and textual stuff. But there does seem to be something fundamental about how there has to be a reset across this period where you sort of strip away the things that had concealed the original forms. Because remember, these marks, just to carry the metaphor a little further, these marks are what you use to tell whether you've crossed over into someone else's territory or whether you're not supposed to cut down that tree because it's marked with another person's property because he gets his acorns from it or his walnuts, right? If you go screwing around with somebody's beehive, it has this mark on it. It also has to do with inheritance, with property rights. It's also the thing that has to do with executive functions like rendering judgment. We say condemn, which is to judge, but we have consign with the placing of the sign. So like a Roman where you cut DAM for damnato ad metallum to send them to the mines. Or like think about Peter Lorre where they put the M on his back in M because he's a malefactor, vagabonds who would be burned with a V. They're not strictly linguistic marks, but they're the basis of how we organize our society. And in the same roughly 5 generational range, we can see across the world evidence that they have to do a reset. This is a bit of a digression, but I think it comes at it from a different direction than all this, fourth turning shit or whatever it is. It's just this functional thing. That's about the extent of living memory. If you think about someone who can remember their grandparents, who's speaking to their grandchildren, that's about as far back as living memory can reach. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that in there. So what have you seen? What has changed? I mean, if you have any thoughts about what I just said, of course, share them. But I didn't mean to derail the discussion.
That was fantastic. That completely just blew my mind because that's I've noticed a similar thing about that pattern of 5 years. The you have the one generation with the 2 before and the 2 after, and that being kind of like the extent of memory, and then tradition being a way of encoding. Is like a technology. It's like a technological attempt to encode memory beyond that point. You develop traditions that you pass on to your children as a way of conveying information, conveying structural, organizational truths about reality, as a way of trying to it's like a way of trying to shorten time, like trying to bring the future into the present, and also trying to bring the present into the future, and find where those meet with one another.
And there's an additional thing to think about here. I mean, the technocrats are in a situation where they essentially control the corpus, the cultural corpus now. I mean, I can buy all these damn books because no one wants them. You can literally just go out, I mean, with a few exceptions, as those of us have found when you go looking for something rare. But for the most part, they're just throwing them on the pyre. And so, as in a certain sense, I guess this wasn't entirely just a digression, because the new technocrats are responsible not only for what is remembered, but in terms of certainly with interface developments, and what they like to call information architecture, and no less than AI, which serves as a kind of truculent and difficult to manage library clerk, right? Who might say that you send them up into the stacks for this book, and they're like, well, no, that's by Goebbels. I'm afraid that we don't have that book. It just disappears. It's like the Vatican Library. They don't even know what's in it. So I think there is an angle of some of these technocrats certainly are perceptive enough to have at least considered what happens if we move into this next phase, simultaneously with this total jettisoning of all that has come before, including just basic, like you were saying, like almost the cultural technology, basic shit that just, it has to do with survival advantage. It has to do with whether or not you produce fit offspring. It has to do with whether or not you can build a levee that will keep your entire neighborhood from being swamped with a storm,
Yeah, this is, and I think this totally wasn't a digression at all, because the thing that I really began observing about them, and it's kind of, I sort of came full circle on this. So, AI is like the big thing. It's the big buzzword. Every single startup, everyone is throwing AI into everything. And a similar way to like DEI, ESG, or climate change, or all these other things, there's like the buzzword du jour. And AI has been that. So I got AI fatigue. And I've never really been a doomer about it. But the more I really tried to dig into these guys and figure out what the things were that they prioritized, both from what they're explicitly saying and from the actions that they're taking, studying like investment patterns and who's talking to who and who's connecting with who and who's lobbying for what, and all these different angles, I'm building out this kind of spider web network in my mind that seems to be going somewhere. And it seems kind of reductive, but it really comes back to AI and everything that's implicated with AI. Because once you start tugging on the AI thread, you get energy, which is like one of the most fundamental things possible. You get military strategy and military effectiveness, and you get a fundamental transformation of the economy. Even the most mundane projections of AI would have a pretty radical economic effect, particularly in white collar, and then the respect to the increasing industrial reshoring of manufacturing. All of this stuff all gets implicated by AI, and then the need, when it becomes very clear that this is a matter of military security, and which gets back to what you were talking about territory, that there's a territorial aspect to this, and this is what is really seems to unite these guys, is the desire for America to be a thing. That America needs to be a thing. It needs to be a refuge, and we need to have strong borders on the land itself, the information space, protecting our intellectual property, building up our own manufacturing capacity, being able to support ourselves economically, having strong borders on who controls our currency and who gets to use it in what ways. All of these things are all existential crises in the minds of these guys as I'm kind of triangulating what they're focused on. They're not talking about these as just a matter of policy. They're talking about this as like, this is an existential fight for civilization. And what we're running into is primarily legislators and regulators who are just completely belligerent and will not cooperate with them, and in fact are actively working against them and treating them as hostile actors, which then just raises the stakes of it even more, because now it's this, you start bringing up things like, all right, someone who's so hell-bent on trying to destroy the sovereignty of America couldn't possibly be an American, which starts bringing up things like treason. And this is where the stakes really start rising. And this is the tone that these guys have been using as they're talking about this. And if this was merely a cynical power ploy, they're just kind of like, they want to be able to capture the market for themselves, and this is just a commercial battle. They wouldn't have the need. There's ways that they could go about doing this that wouldn't require this sort of apocalyptic language, and then you can get into the intra. Really, what's happening is San Francisco has completely taken over the U.S. government from both sides, and you've got the attorney general running currently the president nominee on the Democratic ticket, and then you've got Silicon Valley and its interests coming in, and people have I think not fully understood the culture in Silicon Valley because the wokeism has been so overbearing. But if you understand managerialism, if you understand the way that bioleninism and the way this stuff has arisen up through the system, it's not something that was really imposed from the top down. It was something that evil actors, malevolent actors opened the door and let it in the back door. And a lot of these guys there who are naturally sort of kind of generic libertarians essentially have been held hostage and accosted by the DEI, ESG, immigration, China, intellectual property theft. All of these things have been imposed on them. And so they see themselves as in an existential battle now to protect their own interests, to protect their own wealth, to protect their ability to do business, period.
And the ability to continue to excel because,
right.
The real carrot, I mean, I have not enjoyed success on anything like the scale of even the minor players among these men. But, I myself, the real carrot for me is I did it, I did it. And you have to imagine, I would have to imagine anyway, that for these people, that's a major thing. You're stealing from me the desired, the goal of having the laurel, or the wreath of whatever sort, placed upon my head as having accomplished X, Y, or Z. And in exchange for it, you're offering me just more money if I shut up and play the game. And, it's very easy for someone, at my level of income to say, man, money, but these are people who they already did that. They're like, I'm going to have to go back and play this whole stupid platform game again. I'm bored with this. I've now imagined this multi-dimensional tesseract, that I want to, get involved with. And you're telling me that, no, I need to shut up because, Nancy Pelosi and huge swaths of power structure in California, particularly San Francisco, is basically knob slobbing for the Chinese, and that's, and the whole idea, you also brought up something else, that this is not necessarily a natural outgrowth. One of the things that I really dislike, and we do have to get to these elites, but here I am derailing it again. A lot of people on the right say, this is the natural outcome of the American experiment. It could go nowhere but here. And so as a consequence, it should have been, smothered in childbirth. It's absolutely an aberration. And this is its natural fruit because it's been subverted. And, these kind of people constantly say, we need to change the system. And not all of them, certainly. The better among them, I think, realize what I realize, which is that it's people. It's always people. Who cares what the system is? You can take the worst system and put the best people in it, and they will make it work. They will bend it to their will. You can take the best system, and I'm not saying ours is necessarily that, and put the worst people in it, and they'll destroy it. They're like, we need a new system. I'm like, show me a human system in all of history that is not susceptible to subversion. So I think these are, broader issues that bear on this. I guess it's just a little bit of a defense. I want to elbow a little bit of room with all the people who are like, oh, America is just shit. It could only ever be shit. We have to replace it with another system. And an old friend of mine used to say, revolutions are where the old assholes get thrown out, new assholes come in between a whole bunch of people die. And so I have never been one, just for the record, for my black helicopter friends and, all the 3-letter agencies that are, if they're not listening, they're their algorithms are ripping this to text and, you know, pulling out keywords. I have no desire to see the basic form of government of the United States torn down and replaced, because I don't think that it's about people.
Mm-hmm. And this actually gets into, this is even more of a digression, but I'll just say it quickly, that this gets into a further thesis of mine that I've been subscribing to for a while. I'll take some of these ideas and I'll just try them on for a little while. You know, like rent the idea and go take it out for a drive and kind of get a feel for it, see what it's like to see life through that, and then if it continues to be a good experience and it seems to be giving me good feedback, then I'll stick with it. And my current idea with that is that we're not in the downfall of America. This is what we're experiencing, is the birth pangs of America. I think the idea that this is like the inevitable end of the American experiment is very historically myopic. I think we haven't seen America as its own standalone sovereign entity superpower. It's been a proxy for, and I think what we're experiencing is the death of the British Empire. And America has been essentially a defense proxy for the British Empire. We've been the hired muscle to protect the British shipping lanes and the whole free market, global New World Order, free trade, all of this that are like, they're supposed to be American principles are not. They're British principles. But there is an American identity. There is an American way of governing. There's an American personality and an American spirit that is discovering itself right now. We're at like the teenage time period in the lifespan of America, like whatever America is going to be. So I think there's the big debate about, is this the fall of the empire or the fall of the republic? And I'm very much on the fall of the republic side. I think we're yet to actually see what the American empire will be.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I mean, we can't get into it here, but on the British angle, there's a stream that I did with Academic Agent, hosted by Apostolic Majesty on the British Empire, that you can find, and some of the basic ideas. I'm more so than usual all over the place with it, but I get the basic elements out there. So if people can put up with the fact that it's kind of scattershot, the argument for that is laid out there. And I'm certainly not seeing the comments here. I'm certainly not one to argue that the British Empire, or the people who came to eventually control it, didn't have their own very specific arrangements with minority groups,
Yes.
where it was a hand-in-glove sort of win-win situation, or at least everybody thought it was. At least the Brits thought it was. I think part of what we're seeing now is the recognition from American elites who've been following that basic program and constrained by its power structures. You know, things like the City of London, New York being sort of the other end of this axis with City of London, banking, international finance, let's call it the donor class. I think that there are a lot of people in the United States who are beginning to recognize that there are real problems with continuing that arrangement in its current form. And that brings us back to your remark from the last stream. These people are not, they have to manage how they approach this. And I think the balancing act that they've settled upon is America needs to exist and Israel too, rather than the one for the other, or for these deeper, older roots with, British imperial projects. So yeah, I agree. And I realize it'll be controversial, but who cares? You know, if we can't hypothesize in whatever way we like, it's a waste of time. So we have all sorts of interesting things. I mean, the biggest one that I saw, of course, that supports your hypothesis is the appointment of J.D. Vance as the vice presidential nominee, or it's the nomination of Vance. And very, very interesting. It fits together entirely with the business with Thiel and that group. It also fits together very nicely with some points you were bringing up in the last discussion about the whole idea of creating some kind of Trumpism, rather than, it being whatever he happens to, roll with. sort of operating as he does, as you can recognize. I don't think he entirely operates this way. He has a coalition, and there are certain things he knows he needs to do. But, his way of dealing with something off the cuff when he's confronted in a discussion, you can tell it's basically, I trust my own instincts and I'm going to follow them. And that is, Trump's instincts are not something that can be institutionalized as such. And so you brought up this idea of how do we codify Trumpism? And we had this idea of 2025. You brought up that project. And in that respect, I've seen a few interesting things. One is this guy, what was his name? I'm terrible with names. This David Marcus guy who just had a long post about having come over from the Democrat Party side of things. You probably know more about it than I do, so I'll leave it to you to unfold that. But just as a last bit of laying this out, there is also, Thiel, who apparently did do quite a bit for Trump the first time around in 2016, as best I can tell. Again, you know more about this than I, but he did drop a good bit of money for Trump in 2016. And then after Trump came into office, if I remember correctly, he was central to setting up that big Silicon Valley meeting where Tim Cook and all these other people appeared. This time around, he's been much more quiet about Trump. He said, what did he just recently? I think he said, "I'll vote for Trump if you put a gun to my head," which sort of fits this same idea, the idea that you have forced us to do this. Some of that may be him setting himself up so that if it doesn't succeed, he doesn't, get destroyed in the purge that would follow and will follow for everyone, if you're wondering. I'm voting for Trump. I have serious questions about elections and whether they matter at all. I'm entirely realistic and I embrace elite theory more or less. But I'm going to vote for Trump. And I hope that everyone else considers voting if indeed you're in the U.S. and are legally permitted to do so. And then the last thing there that I wanted to throw in was Zuckerberg. What the hell's going on with Zuckerberg? He played an interesting role in making things happen the way they did last time around, to put it carefully. But I haven't heard anything from him this time around. So this is sort of the background that I've seen. I'm sure you've been paying more attention to it. What have you seen?
Yeah, so let's see here. With Vance, I think the idea of attempting to institutionalize Trumpism or find the successor to Trump, this has kind of become almost like a white whale sort of in the right-wing political sphere. And I think that there's sort of like how I feel about it or what my opinion is about it doesn't really have a lot of impact. I'm just trying to observe the things that I'm seeing happen. And JD Vance happens to be perfectly positioned to bridge the gap between the more traditional Republican base and this new elite technocratic cabal, I guess that's moving forward. And I think as a politician, as a public face, I think Vance is kind of a little underwhelming. I don't think that he doesn't have a ton of charisma. He's not. I think he's a very compelling speaker when he's not on a teleprompter. He doesn't do a teleprompter very well. He's kind of awkward, and some of this could be a matter of experience. But what I do see in Vance is one of the most telling things about him is an essay that he wrote in 2019 or 2020 about written in 2020 about his conversion in 2019 to Roman Catholicism. And if you have any experience listening to people seriously talking about their theological journey and taking these sorts of matters seriously and really agonizing over the different aspects of it, you can see that this is you can read authenticity into something. Like you can recognize the authenticity when it's there. And that sort of essay doesn't come from it is very vulnerable. It doesn't come from like a craven political operative. However, I do think that he's a very effective political operative. So he's much more of a you might say like a Dick Cheney kind of vice president, where Trump is the face, Trump is the brand, Trump is the aesthetic, and then JD's job is just essentially to bring all the money to the table and then facilitate the deregulation, pro energy, pro crypto, the things that his guys want. With respect to Zuckerberg, there is there's a very interesting theory that I have, and this one is entire speculation. I have no substantiation for this. I just have circumstantial evidence. But Zuckerberg has made a few comments recently. One of them was he was asked about Trump's assassination attempt, and he said it was like genuinely badass and one of the coolest things that he's ever seen. And he also said that he's been kind of involved in, said something about like he's been financially involved in some elections in the past, but he's going to sit this one out, which is significant because it was notoriously his $419 million that formed the backbone of the election fortification machine that Time Magazine gleefully reported about in February of 2021. So as I was sitting here kind of piecing together these events, number one, Peter Thiel is, I have it on very good authority from people who know him personally, who have spent time with him, talked to him personally, that he is the closest thing that we're going to get in an elite class, a billionaire class, to one of our guys. He is unabashedly right-wing and unabashedly Christian. And I know lots of people don't want to hear that, and lots of people want to spurg out about that. I'm just saying what I've been told by people who know him personally, who I trust. So, and there's plenty of evidence for this as well. If you know, the two primary mentors that he had were Rene Girard, for whom he was the only PhD student that Girard ever had, and then Antonin Scalia. These were the men who were formative for him as mentors and have had a big impact on him. And you might be able to connect some dots from that if you are well read on your history events of the last decade or so. But so Thiel, Zuckerberg. So Thiel was Zuckerberg's first investor, first public investor. We'll say that. First on the record investor was Peter Thiel. Zuckerberg was, I think, 20. And Thiel was the big investor that really made Facebook take off. So if you think about that from a starting, let me kind of build up the narrative here. If you think about that from the starting premise, you're going to have a pretty good relationship with a guy like that. If you think you have like a 20-year-old guy, some wealthy man comes and invests a bunch of money into your thing, you're going to have a close relationship. And then if you wanted to see how close that relationship has been, you would say, okay, well, in the intervening 20 years, what has there been more evidence that relationship is close? And there's been extensive evidence for it. Zuckerberg actually was under a lot of political pressure, to his credit. I think he's a bit of a goofball, but to his credit, he was under a lot of political pressure when Thiel came out publicly supporting and investing in Trump in 2016. And then into 2019, there was lots of conflict with Peter being on the Facebook board, and Zuckerberg deferred to him on some pretty significant issues, particularly surrounding COVID. So there's strong evidence that they've been close for a long time. And we have one other character who's notoriously close to Thiel, or has connections to Thiel, let's say, who also has connections to Vance, who was going around the podcast circuit talking in 2020 about the necessity that it would be best in the 2020 election for Joe Biden to win from like a realpolitik perspective, because 4 years of Biden is going to reveal the regime for exactly what it is, this necrotic Brezhnevian catastrophe. And that this was necessary to essentially take the steam out from the regime. Well, that perspective was hard to hear at that point, but it's been pretty well vindicated, I think, since then. So these are these little circumstantial points that now you have Zuckerberg, who plays a prominent role in ensuring, I might want to make sure I'm not like violating YouTube terms of service or whatever, but he's playing a prominent role in the 2020 election, let's say. And then 4 years later, it's just like, oh no, actually I'm pulling out. And he's also like, he's gone full wigger stylistically, and he does jujitsu, and he's out like wake surfing and doing these sorts of physical activities, regenerative agriculture. These things have spiritual power over you. So even if you were to start doing them as part of like an orchestrated PR thing to recraft your image, they're going to have a spiritual effect on you.
Yeah, and just
Why you
shift
want
your
to do that.
testosterone levels. I mean,
Right.
let's be real. Yeah.
Right. So I think the the illusion that I'm making here, I can't substantiate it with any sort of evidence, but it sure seems like the whole election fortification thing and Zuckerberg's involvement in it may not have been out of Democratic Party loyalty, perhaps. Um, so that was
Yeah,
my
that's
you brought up Zuckerberg. That was Zuckerberg. Those were my thoughts on him.
yeah, and I don't mean to cut you off because I'm sure there's much more to go over this David Marcus guy
Oh yeah,
and the rest. But there's yeah, there is, and this is just a hypothesis, and I've been burned in the past, as a matter of fact, with this very hypothesis. But I will be watching closely what happens in these coming months, because I may get to barf up a little bit of the crow I had to eat over the last 4 years, but we'll see. It does seem that from everything you're laying out here, and a number of other reasons beside, that some people made the decision, no, the United States is not ready yet. They do not see how bad it is yet. They're going to really have to have their faces rubbed in it in order to understand that we have come to this point. And the argument has been made on my channel 4 years ago, as a matter of fact, to just short of 4 years ago, that maybe that's why Biden had to come in. Now, I'm not telling everybody to trust the plan, but that argument can be made. And one way or another, I think we're going to either see things that tend to corroborate it come over the horizon in the next 3 or 4 months, or we may see it fall apart a bit. But along those lines, Thiel himself has also said, I'm not giving any money this time, which is, I begin to think the lady doth protest too much. This whole, if they did it openly once, if we were to hypothesize that they did it on purpose, not to necessarily help the Democrats, but as a part of a larger thing within electoral cycles to raise the temperature and to psychologically prepare the population for certain shifts, then we could at least imagine that there would be some significance in doing it openly. Because I'll tell you this, if people at Zuckerberg's level want to give money to someone without it being known, they can do it. I'm not saying that, government intelligence services aren't going to find out about it, but, people at the New York Times aren't, unless someone in the intelligence services tells them. So the fact that he would do it openly now, he would do it openly in the past, and then be like, nope, hands off this time around. And for Thiel to be like, I did it openly in 2016, but now hands off this time around, when all signs indicate not only that is there a great deal on the line for these people, but your hypotheses about Trump and this Thiel group coming together having been borne out, we can see that their shit is on the line to a considerable extent this time, not just in the general sense that you were talking about before, a competency crisis, we just want this country to work, but no, David Marcus, Zuckerberg at least having some kind of a shift, Thiel still being in there. Now is the time when it would matter most. So I'm supposed to imagine that just because they say they're not giving any money, that there's no money flowing that way. And indeed, you could also say, well, what other ways could Trump be helped? How is he being helped simply by the fact that Musk owns what used to be Twitter? How is he being assisted? How would he be assisted if we could hypothesize that suddenly the algorithms might change on Facebook, which still has its boomer constituency? Anyway, so yeah, David Marcus, Thiel, Zuckerberg. What else do you think about these things? What does it signal?
So I'll credit our good mutual friend Pete Quinones for this observation, that it seems among this sector of right-leaning venture capitalist types, the one who seems to have taken over taken the baton from Thiel in terms of being the more activist public investor is Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz. And a very telling conversation is the one he and the Andreessen and Horowitz had on their podcast. That's been about 2 weeks now, maybe, about the little tech agenda. They are telling you openly in that conversation exactly the things that they care about. And it's, again, the same things I've been listing off: AI, crypto, China, immigration, DEI and ESG, uh, uh, deregulating. And then they also mentioned taxing unrealized capital gains, that this is not just something that was thrown out as a just, some radical token to the radical crowd, but there's actual plans to institute a tax on unrealized capital gains in 2025 if the Democratic candidate takes the presidency. That sort of thing is, you don't have to be some sort of radical right-wing ideologue to recognize the absolute civilizational destroying catastrophic hazard that would be a tax on unrealized capital gains. So I think Andreessen has really taken over the mantle from Thiel here. And if you know Thiel and his understanding of Girardian memetics, then he's created the memetic model for other people to follow now. So he doesn't need to be directly invested in it. There's Elon, there's Andreessen Horowitz, the 8VC. There's all these different institutions that have all these guys have all come out, and they're all contributing millions, tens of millions of dollars a month to Trump. So Trump doesn't need money from Peter Thiel now. Thiel has kind of laid out the groundwork, and other people are now following in his footsteps. So David Marcus would be another one of these, former CEO of PayPal. I think he was CTO or something at Meta, and has been very deeply involved in the tech executive world for a long time, very well respected. And he's come out, even used the language Rubicon.
And Meta is a Zuckerberg joint, right? I mean, it's
that's the parent company for Facebook and Instagram,
right? So, I mean, it's getting difficult to imagine that Zuckerberg is currently a neutral player.
Yes,
and it's or to suppose that, and as a consequence, given his long-standing background with Thiel, I mean, I was born at night, but not last night, man. I'm not sure that. Yeah, I just don't see. I don't buy the idea that Zuckerberg had an epiphany and he just suddenly shifted his political instincts. Just did an about face. That seems very, very difficult to credit. Very difficult to credit. And then there's this whole angle that we can perhaps get into in just a bit about this idea I've been attached to for quite some time about Musk and the military industrial complex. But before we get there, you mentioned Andreessen. I don't know anything about him. I just don't follow these things. I'm a bit of a boomer myself. What can you tell us about him?
So he's one of the most well-respected VCs from a long time ago. He was involved, I believe it was Netscape was his project. And he's the one of the founders of Andreessen Horowitz. And incidentally, Andreessen Horowitz has an initiative that anyone who's interested would be a fun thing to go look at, called American Dynamism, which is then associated with this phenomenon called Gundo, which is a bunch of like early 20s white boys with mullets, and they love Zen pouches and energy drinks, and they're unabashedly patriotic and pro-natalist, and talking about the nuclear family and having babies and using energy, and they're all building hardware, military tech hardware. This is basically the new military industrial complex coming down the line, and it's populated by a bunch of unabashedly American white boys. Mark Andreessen blocked me on Twitter. If true, that's really funny, because one of the things with Mark Andreessen is that it's been a meme for a while that he follows a whole bunch of our guys on Twitter, but he also follows like 25,000 people. So it was kind of like, oh, cool. Some random guy will get a follow from Mark Andreessen. He's like, what the fuck? And then, maybe a couple weeks later, Mark Andreessen will unfollow him. But over the past several months, as Andreessen has become more and more outspoken and then openly endorsed Trump, he's also been pandering to our crowd a little bit more. He even changed his profile picture to dark MAGA. He was one of the first ones to do it when that trend started picking up. And he also, in response to a tweet talking about this tech bro Trump takeover thing. Someone said something about it being a battle against managerialism or something to that effect, and he quote tweeted that with one of the dart emojis, and then he quote tweeted that with pictures of the covers of the Machiavellians and the Managerial Revolution. So he's been signaling to us for quite a while, and now it seems very clear. And then I happen to know I've heard through the grapevine that he's very much in alignment. Like, if he may not be exactly one of our guys, but he's much closer than he seems in public, and he seems pretty much like one of our guys in public.
Yeah, I just want to jump in with two things. The first is this guy of Vodka Amas is saying, if you think these billionaires are about anything but themselves, you might as well believe the earth is flat. All I have to say to that is go watch the previous discussion. And if you missed the opening of this discussion, listen to it again, because the basic idea here is that it's a convergence of self-interest, which is the basis of any human cooperation that isn't pathological. So, I mean, no one here, I certainly can say it for myself anyway. I think it's the case for Matt. It's the same shit I had to say last time. No one here imagines that there is some magical world where these guys get up in the morning and they're like, man, I really wish Daily Stormer had more money, man. And I just want to help them as a function of, my charitable attitude. No one imagines that. So the entire idea that anything that we are now saying would require the assumption that these billionaires are about anything but themselves. Anyway, that enough of that. What was the other thing? Oh, Andreessen, you mentioned he's with Netscape, and I'm old now, so I remember back in my days when I had a little boutique application development shop, and those were the days before Apple was quote unquote saved by Bill Gates, who basically got a huge amount of ownership in Apple because they had been struggling. They had done things like trying to introduce the Newton. Jobs had played games with, and the Newton proved to be, an important step towards the quote unquote smartphone. But Jobs was having real problems. People who are alive then will remember that he basically allowed Mac clones to begin to be created, and Apple was really foundering. And at that same time, there was this beginning of a tech pushback. And I'm glad I thought of this, actually, because there is some background for this in the sense that the tech people were saying, hey, wait a minute, we're getting pushed out by monopolies. These crappy Windows operating systems are, they're just a drag on personal computing in general, and there need to be alternatives. There was... and I think you mentioned him in another stream, if not by name. I remember you saying something about a Sun Microsystems guy.
Oh yeah.
In our last stream, and at that time, if I'm not mistaken, people in the chat can come in and hopefully old heads like me can come in and remind me if I have this right. But I believe that Netscape and thus I imagine Andreessen and whatever his name was with Sun Microsystems, they were way...
Khosla.
Pardon?
Vinod Khosla. He was the founder.
Maybe that's the dude. Somebody's got to help me, because it was Java, and Java being a more open source platform, and so the Sun guy got behind it, and I believe that the Netscape guy got behind it, and their big boogeyman at the time, who's now busy trying to figure out ways to reprocess human shit so we can eat it and extract water from it and drink it and set up his vax regimes, is Bill Gates. So some of these guys, at least, if I'm remembering right, had aligned themselves against Bill Gates back in the day, and I think just as a kind of like a fuck you, you paisan. Gates said, "Oh, you guys think that Apple is going to be the big alternative? Well, watch Coke buy Pepsi." And he basically made Apple his own. So that's something Yeah, speedrunners coming in. Maybe, yeah, Linux was definitely another aspect of this, but please tell me, those who know, I think I have it right about Sun and Java, but that's something that other people should look at and maybe come back to us about, because I think there is some of these players align themselves, ended up at loggerheads in the past. And we may be seeing some aspects of this if you think about Gates and you think about who backed him and how he had his rise back in the day. But anyway, that's I just wanted to throw that in. Please take the floor, sir.
One principle I think that is useful to remember with these billionaires is that none of them are, I would say, I'm kind of running through a Rolodex in my head. I can't think of a single billionaire that I would say this doesn't very clearly apply to. Maybe Peter Thiel, but even then I'd be kind of surprised. Every single one of these billionaires is a front for other interests. They're not independent actors in their own right, even if some of them may see themselves that way or think that they are that way. And I would say this is doubly true for the technologist billionaires, particularly if you got these guys like Andreessen and Musk who are involved in technologies that have very clear military applications, let's say, which is really, I mean, the internet was a military application to begin with. There's a very useful conversation, Balaji Srinivasan, former CTO of Coinbase, and I can't remember what else he does right now, but he's the author of The Network State. He had a conversation on The Moment of Zen, where he's talking to kind of like a normie Silicon Valley audience, basically, and he's describing to them the significance of what's happening with the tech titans moving to take over the federal government effectively. He's got a very interesting observation about it, and one of the things he said is that these guys have essentially been building a parallel world since 1991. And 1991 is significant because that's the date that the internet was first available for commercial use. Prior to that, it was only .mil and .edu. It was like an educational and military application, and then it went to commercial use. And at that point, he said you had this rise of a new industry, essentially tech. Like tech was not really an industry before. You would have you didn't really care about the people who or like make all the toasters or the political positions or inclinations of the car manufacturers aren't like that. There's not really like a distinct identity there. But with the internet and social media and the digital world, you now have a whole new industry of guys who formerly would have occupied roles explicitly in the government. They would have actually been, the treasury secretaries or the head of different federal bureaucracies. But all of those, the managerial process has selected away from the competent people. The competent people have gone into the private sector and been developing in the technology world. Whereas, and then the mediocre people have been funneled into the so-called public sector. But in either case, I would say a useful rule of thumb when you're thinking about this and trying to evaluate the different characters maybe in the background is the military has distinct interests in all of these things. And when I say the military, there are military actors that are not ideological. There are not, everyone is really overusing the term Zionist and neocon lately, and it's starting to drive me crazy because someone having a sympathetic feelings for Israel or thinking like, hey, Israel should be an ally of ours does not make them a Zionist. You're completely watering down what an actual Zionist is. Same with neocon. Someone saying, hey, the U.S. should have a strong military base and be able to have people who are proud to serve in the military, and that we should use that military sometimes. That does not make one a neocon. This reductionism has been driving me crazy. But this kind of maybe leads into the thing you wanted to talk about with Elon and X. And X being very clearly a doubling as both a military technology and a commercial technology. These things are kind of getting blurred. And I would say that the takeover of X was not merely a commercial deal. This wasn't just, hey, this is a really valuable platform. It wasn't just, hey, I want to be able to have a free speech thing that I believe in, so I'm going to take over this platform. No, this was a recognition and a concerted effort to take over the most militarily significant communications platform in the world. With
quick
in mind.
With what in mind? Sorry.
with that perspective in mind. Like, this is a strategic military move.
Yeah, just for people who don't get this, I brought it up in the last discussion, this idea of unrestricted warfare. And it's not the same thing as 5th generation warfare. It's not the same thing as information operations. It's not the same thing as psychological operations. It's the idea. You have to get your head around it at present. You have to. Everyone has to. Everything is war. Everything is war. There are no rear areas. There is no distinction between the economic, the social, the political, even the religious, and the military. Now, I'm not saying that within religions themselves, that religion does not stand on its own. But what I'm trying to say is every aspect of life is war. And that's why I brought up what I did in our previous discussion about how my buddy back in the day told me that The Art of War by Sun Tzu is like a workbook, an exercise book, an application book for basic ideas from the Tao. And so that, I think, is something that I think there's a delivery going on behind me. Hopefully my wife will cope with that. So the basic idea is that warfare is everything. There are no rear areas. There are no non-combatants. There is no distinction between civilian and military anymore at all, which is why, hopefully everyone will begin to get this, which is why there's no aspect of our life that is not under attack. There is no place where you can, so to speak, retreat from the front lines and enjoy some R&R. The structure of the family is under attack. The nature of education is under attack. I just saw some weird little device called Friend that you're supposed to wear around your neck that's supposed to be your friend. It's like, hey, this surveillance device isn't enough. What we need is more. Carrying 3 or 4 cameras and multiple microphones around in our back pocket is not enough. We've got to be managed more thoroughly. And so that is a fundamental thing that everyone has got to understand, that not just for the reasons that Matt is talking about, there no longer is any distinction. The military people have been able to understand this for quite some time. The more forward thinking among them, and I believe the better class of individuals involved with intelligence agencies have to have known this. There's no, the damn communists. Look at the French Revolution. They changed the calendar. They said we're going to have rationally ordered 30-day months, and they're going to be state religious observances for those 30-day months. They changed the week to a 10-day run in order to remove Sunday. Under Stalin for a while, he experimented with a 5-day week, and they had color-coded work schedules on these 5-day weeks so that there was constant production. They wanted to get rid of the week itself because Friday, Saturday, and Sunday give you the Abrahamic religions. And so in order to change that structure of 7, or in order to get rid of those things, they had to change that structure of 7. Anyway, I'm probably hammering it too hard, but it's important to understand that. If you think about Twitter, to get back to Matt's main point here, think about the ability to graph that information about what's happening as the result of a tweet goes out and proliferates through these networks, and the kind of responses, not just likes, but you've got put it this way, if X was mine, I know what I would be doing. And I would want to be able to see the results of things in real time. So I could sit in front of a war room set of screens, watching how a given subject or event or fact being introduced was responded to by all the people who are communicating, and how they grow and change, and through which nodes, and where they see constriction with the narrative, or where they see the flowerings of counter narratives. When you're looking at that, it's the closest thing to a map of, and remember, X is global. So you can take all of this information and break it out by, demographic, psychographic, geographical region, linguistic variations. the value of a tool like this is staggering. So anyway, just to reinforce your point there, sir.
And on top of that, too, having been on Twitter for like 15 years now, I've watched its rise and its development and it becoming. It's been clear to me for probably close to 10 years that there's no question whatsoever that Twitter is the public square for the world. If there is a public square, it's Twitter. Everything flows downstream from Twitter. All the trends, everything all funnels through Twitter and goes everywhere else. So that being the case, I've also watched the way Twitter, with the blue check phenomenon, which has been destroyed, which is kind of the point. The blue check phenomenon was a very real thing. And I watched the way the blue check, being the regime voice, essentially, the verified journalist, the NGO, the whatever thing got the blue check that was able to function as a real thing, they got priority in the algorithm and they were able to drive narratives. And I watched them astroturf these things. They would have some independent person would put out a tweet, and then there would be these random anonymous accounts that would reply to the tweet. And then there would be an article in the Washington the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or something like that, talking about vague things like the response, or they would characterize this as the sentiment of an entire group of people when it was just a couple of like fake replies in a tweet. I watched them bootstrap narratives like this, the whole BLM thing, all these different major leftist progressive social movements were bootstrapped up through Twitter. And we know for a fact that there was plenty of these organizations like Antifa and BLM and all of these proxies for the regime that were organizing through Twitter DMs. And then they were sourcing stories, talking to journalists and other official people through Twitter DMs. So when they took it over, they got all of that data as well, which if you're looking at an organization of or a loosely affiliated coalition of people who see themselves as executing a regime change operation, which I believe is what we're watching, they now have an immense amount of dirt on the old regime and the way that it functioned, all of its dirty laundry. Now, I'm sure when people were on their way out of Twitter, this is part of why such a huge number of people were fired immediately from Twitter, to prevent them from scrubbing up as much of that data as possible. They had to fire a whole bunch of people so they could contain as much of the data as they could possibly get. And I'm sure they probably lost a lot of it. And then this would also be part of the purpose in, I'm sure in a lot of the ongoing legislation, people sue, or not legislation, but the lawfare, people suing Elon Musk for wrongful termination on all this sort of thing. I'm sure they're doing everything they can to hold up this process. So these are some of the behind the scenes things that are happening with this that I think a lot of people who look at this is just the new elite, same as the old elite. They look at all the ways that the new elite are the same as the old elite, but they don't look at all the ways that they are not the same. And there's a very many significant ways that they are not the same and that they have directly divergent interests. And the entire point of this, to address that other commenter, is that these guys are self-interested. That's actually what makes them so much easier to predict, because you can just trace what's their self-interest. What territory do they want to protect? And if they see themselves as having to go against the regime to protect that territory, that tells you something about how they perceive the regime and about how the regime perceives them. And the regime seems to treat them as hostiles. So it ends up being kind of this funny thing where, people tell me I'm like a trust the plan guy or something. And I'm like, no, I think it's a much more vast schizo conspiracy to somehow suggest that this is a coordinated, deep regime op that is forming these pincers to come get us from either side. That's far more tinfoil hat than I can stomach. I think it's very obvious that we're just watching a regime change op.
Yeah, for my part, I've always hypothesized a deep state and a deeper state. Mm-hmm. And the idea there is, first off, they've already got us. Like, yes. Everyone here is like, I just tried to sign up for Stripe, and one of the things that I had to click through on, I still can't do it. I'm like, I can't like reach forward to click, because it's like when you click on accepting Stripe, which I thought was going to be something that like put money into my account. They're like, in order to do this, no, you have to give them the authorization to debit your account, and not only debit your account without any prior notice. Like everyone's like, oh, they're going to come get us. No, they've already got us. And we're perfectly happy to have it that way because we call it convenience. I went to some shithole hipster joint. I mean, they did make a good old fashioned, you know, the guy with the handlebar mustache. But they laughed at me when I tried to pay with cash at the bar. They laughed at me. They didn't take cash. It was like, ooh, cash. I'm like, wait a minute. You're the cool kids, right? The lefty cool kids. And you're sneering at me because I haven't chosen to empower them to have ever more granular surveillance or the ability to just turn it off. You know, the old days, it was like you take cash out of the ATM, but they can turn your card off or they can shut down the ATM. No, they just pinpoint stop you now. You know, people get into cars now where the car, they could, I mean, if it's self-driving, then they just pull over to the side of the road, turn off the engine and lock you in, you know, and dispatch a police car. Like what else do they need to do? That part is completely done. But I do hypothesize, and I'm going to try and say it more concisely since I'm known for not being terse than I did in the last discussion, but I want to hit it again. We have a situation where the military-industrial complex cannot continue to function under the idea that everything's going to be distributed. If your steel is coming from China, if your military technology involves 16 different countries that are collaborating to produce the F-35 or whatever, and large amounts of shit about, you know, the composites that the planes are covered in order to reduce their radar signature, or this engine technology, or these rare earth minerals. If all of that is distributed, then the military-industrial complex, which has always been, to Matt's earlier point about where the internet fucking comes from, it is the driver. People like to say that the oldest profession is prostitution, and no, it's war.
Yes.
I mean, I just, you know, think of the beginning of, you know, 2001. It's conflict, and it has not only been the driver of the more immediate things that we think of as tech. It's gunpowder. It's you know, the tension of a compound bow made with bone and sinew and wood and glue. It's chariots. It drives technology, and it gives you the advantage. And it gives you the advantage in the domain that is decisive. You can talk to somebody about, you can try to convince and all these other things. You know, you can attempt to sway like a good capital L libertarian, you know, the non-aggression principle and all the rest. But none of that matters. It's the thing about warfare, to again reference my old friend, he used to say, you ain't gotta like it. That's the whole point. You don't have to like it. It doesn't matter what the fuck you think. And so tech is fundamentally related to warfare. And if we also include this previous point about everything being war now, you can either be in a position to determine what happens, or you can be in the position of subjugation, ass high in the air, presented to receive what others determine should happen to you. And I just don't see core aspects of the United States tied to industry and tied to military technology being willing to throw their skirt up over their head and just roll around on the floor and wet themselves the way that we've been going. I mean, who in their right mind would want to have a certain cohort that I won't name, but that has a serious problem with suicide, be welcomed into the military, where you could see them act out with, I don't know, a stolen crate of claymores, right? Like, who thinks that's a good idea? And clearly that is the direction that we have been going. I don't think that anyone here who is honest can doubt that we have been on the receiving end of a decades-long program to degrade and destroy us as a functional nation, both financially, socially, in terms of birth rates, in terms of family structure, in terms of destruction of religion, and of course our military. There's only a certain amount of that you can take. And so as a consequence, I hypothesize that there is a deeper state that's been around longer, that's tied to the military-industrial complex, and that recognizes what's going to happen. And I think it's likely, overwhelmingly likely, as I mentioned in our previous discussion, Musk is dealing with battery technology, with AI, which is going to be absolutely critical for things like drone swarms. He's running the damn Starlink system up that the entire Ukrainian military misadventure relies upon. And there's simply no way that guy is not dialed in with such people, because there are ways that you can make people disappear. You can do it no matter how wealthy you are. It can be done. And if you don't even want to take that angle, just think about the ways that you could have your behavior and actions constrained. And I don't think that there's any doubt that there is real animus against Musk, which means that not only would he have to be supported by the people whose foundation he still stands upon and for whom his own work is foundational, but he's also facing attacks from people who want him gone. So in those circumstances, if somebody really important didn't want him to still be there, he simply wouldn't be. And so this brings us to the idea of a deeper state, a military-industrial complex. Because again, to your point about a kind of nationalism, there has to be a bucket into which some things go, notably military technology, under this expanded definition of war, which means all aspects of life, and bearing in mind these ideas about technology. There has to be a territorial bucket into which that goes that maintains some standard of loyalty, or at least, a compartmentalization. And so other groups have to be kept out of that, I think, as well.
And that sort of thing can be that's not controllable by some sort of global government. Like all it takes is a single national level actor acting territorially, and it's going to force that sort of response from other equivalent actors. I saw someone else earlier in the chat said something about these guys don't have any, whatever this means, like they don't have any personal investment in America, but they just want America to serve as a platform for them to, like, they want to control the entire world or control the skies or something, which I don't see how these things are mutually exclusive necessarily. You're kind of having to read their minds to say that they don't have any investment in America, like personally, spiritually, something like that. I don't know. But even if that is the case, let's take the most cynical reading of this possible. They want America purely to be they're the same as the old elites in that they want a tax base for funding all of their projects. Well, here's where they're different from the old elites. They want an efficient, effective, healthy, prosperous, growing tax base. The old elites have an ideological proclivity toward completely annihilating their tax base, going to war with them on every spiritual front and trying to maximize incompetence and maximize degeneracy. So even if that's simply we're going to take the most cynical view of them and line it up with what we know about the previous regime, hey, I'll take that trade. I'll take being a client of a different patron that at least wants me to thrive and be successful for his own sake, versus the patron who hates me and wants to destroy everything that I value. I will take transactional, sort of cynical, pragmatic pandering to me if the alternative is active hostility toward me and the desire to genocide me and my people.
Right. Yeah. Cut your cock off. Great idea.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Which one of these am I going to go with? Yes.
Right. And then, like these guys, I've said before that they're like I started calling them the grillionaires, because they're the billionaires who just want to grill. They want to, like, the point is that they're self-interested. Elon wants to shoot skyscrapers into the sky. He wants to explore other planets. He wants to create massive building projects, the likes of which humanity has never seen. He wants to take these things on, and there's that great man spirit that's animating, whether it's animating him personally, the actual flesh and blood person, or animating Elon, the character, who's like an agglomeration of a bunch of different influences, and he's the front man for them. In either case, this Elon persona wants to conquer the universe. And this is an existential thing. This is not simply cynical or just entirely self-serving. There's a deep history of men who think like this and operate this way. It's something that's driven humanity for all of our history. So if a man like that sees himself being held back by these sorts of forces, then this is not to say it's just self-interested is uh, is like the biggest understatement of all time. Of course it's self-interested. That's the
Yeah,
point. The point is it's
to say
self-interested.
it's to say nothing at all. Yeah, like what
Yes.
isn't self-interested? I mean,
Right.
and table stakes for being an adult, as far as I'm concerned, is to dismiss those who claim to be ideologically motivated, recognizing that it's all bullshit, it's self-interest, and in the worst of cases, maybe it isn't, but thankfully those people are few and far between. The ones who really do have, a sort of Rasputin stare, who really are ideologically motivated. For the vast majority of people who aren't utterly psychopathic, self-interest rules the day. And to bring up another angle on this, Thiel, I was looking at him again yesterday, just trying to become better acquainted with him, because I really don't know much about him. And I looked, he's got this whole thing where he was funding this idea of offshore cities, human settlements. And that's just, to me, I immediately look at it and I'm like, oh, territorial claim. You've got resources in the sea and beneath the seafloor in a given location. Well, if you set up a settlement, then not only do you get to experiment with how people are organized in those circumstances, but you make a territorial claim to a certain region where you choose to put that settlement, which would otherwise be considered the high seas and be constrained by a different set of different aspects of international maritime law and territorial waters and the rest, exclusive economic zones. So yeah, these guys are motivated by self-interest. Let's just hope that their self-interest isn't premised upon bio-Leninist assumptions. If I mean, I believe that there are peoples associated with places, and that they should, each of them in turn, have their homelands and exercise control over what happens in those places. But at this point, and now I'm beating a dead horse, so I'll just say it and we'll be done. I would much prefer someone who comes in and says, yeah, let's just go with basic functional social and economic territorialization, military, social, and economic. Doesn't have to be blood and soil, just something, right? To say this is not that. And then otherwise, hierarchy, meritocracy in this case, if that's what it has to be. Because then what you have is, if you look at like a diagram to represent space, X, Y, and Z axes, you've got this extension in space, which is territorial, and you've got the vertical axis of social or organization based on competence. I can work with that. There's space. It has four walls. It has a floor and a ceiling. It has a vertical axis. I can do something with that. Okay, so coming back around, though, there was something that you had brought up previously. I've got a little note here for myself. You were talking about Jamie Dimon and Jerome Powell at the Fed, and what you referred to at the time as onshoring of U.S. finance. And I know you watch at least a couple guys whose podcasts you enjoy about that. Has anything else come up on that front? Because that was a major aspect of what you were discussing as potential before. Have you seen anything develop there?
I don't think that I've seen any specific newsworthy events. Now, of course, the people who follow that closely would be, there's probably been a whole bunch of them, but nothing that's broken through to my onto my radar, because I haven't been following that particular thesis as closely, in part because it seems as if it's been fully confirmed already. And this thesis would be the primary proponents of it that I've seen are Tom Luongo, a mutual friend of ours with Piquinones, and then another guy named Phil Gibson on Twitter, and QPOL, Quiet Part Out Loud, on Substack, and then Danielle DiMartino Booth. Those are the big names that are associated with this particular thesis. And what it is essentially is, you might call it like sovereigntist aspects, characters within the U.S. commercial banking system. So like private banking, private capital within the U.S. Beginning to make moves to restore American control over its own currency and maintain American investment in capital markets, and begin to detach them from the European markets. And you can, like, one of the biggest evidences of this, as I understand, and this is an area that I don't have any expertise in. I've followed it enough to get the idea, and I've had lots of people who do have a lot of expertise in it say that what I'm talking about reaffirms what they're talking about. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt, and then go listen to them for the real breakdown. But basically, part of the reason why American interest rates have been held as high as they have for as long as they have is because it's bankrupting Europe. And there's a lot of deep there's layers to this. Once you get into the city of London, you're getting into like China selling off US treasuries. Who are they selling them to? What's the reason for this? There's the euro dollar system, which is essentially the offshore dollars that America after World War II loaned to Europe to facilitate the rebuilding of Europe after World War II. Well, then the European banks then were able to hold these dollars in reserve, and as fractional reserve banks do, were able to lend and inflate the U.S. currency overseas, which meant that there was overseas influence on the value of the American dollar. So America didn't actually have independent control over the U.S. dollar. And this euro dollar system has been something that has dragged. It's not a formal system. It's an informal system called the euro dollar that has dragged American interest economically and socially and politically, along with a lot of the different European projects. So then from there, you have the World Economic Forum, you have Davos, you have the European technocrats and the EU and those interests. Well, these American financial interests are basically withdrawing America from that entire CF, which is an extremely complex long-range project. But it's kind of ironically now, it seems as if this thesis is true, then the Fed is actually has gone from villain status to I don't know, not like white hat, whatever term you want to use for it. Again, this is a self-interested thing, because if you are involved in American private capital, like that is your own source of wealth and power and influence. And to cede over to this global communist World Economic Forum globalist agenda is basically to just give away the keys to the Ferrari. They have a strong self-interest in maintaining American capital and actually building up American capital, reshoring American manufacturing, building up American industrial capacity, which is then where they overlap significantly with the energy sector and with the tech, the tech CEOs and investors. And so this forms, I think, what are the broad three-part coalition that's moved behind Trump, which would be the new right American political faction that is wanting to take over the Republican Party, which would be as distinct from the Con Inc. neocon old Republican Party. So there's the new right, then you have the tech Silicon Valley sector, and then the American commercial banking sector. These would be kind of a broad coalition that has thrown their support behind Trump. You have Steven Schwartzman from Blackstone has said that he's got his support behind Trump. So, and that's a big mover in Wall Street. So I think this whole story it's all part of the same story. These are all factions that have mutual self-interest in cooperating and using Trump as a vehicle to bring about their own agendas, which are at loggerheads with the globalist Davos World Economic Forum side of things, Bill Gates, and it's you can segment these things off fractally. There's a whole bunch of different influences within them, but they kind of overarching they form into two broad camps.
Interesting. And it brings to mind what you're talking about with finances in Europe. You know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, we discussed it a bit last time, insofar as we were able, you know, the idea of oh my God, I just completely spaced foreign policy. You know, because there's no way to consider the United States without contextualizing it in terms of foreign policy. And, you know, I think, you know, there's something going on with Europe. I don't know what it is. You know, a lot of people, particularly academic agent, you know, is all about the gay. And, you know, I've said in the past that I hold to the idea of a global Anglo-American empire. I basically just think that the people in charge of Britain jumped ship, left Britain after World War II, gutted it upon departure so that it was literally like bleeding out on the floor for decades after they left. And they just, hightailed it to the U.S. While maintaining, control over critical financial institutions and structures within the city of London and the rest. But I think there also is an aspect of this EU Brussels technocrat elite. And I don't know exactly what it is, but all you have to do is look at somebody like Hillary Clinton or Obama going to Europe and just being loved by everyone tripping and falling all over themselves in order to say how great, Clinton and Obama are, and they just love each other, they embrace. Or look at how the European leaders responded to Trump when he went the various times to Europe to discuss things with them, whether it was at the UN or otherwise. There's something going on with Europe there, and the experiment there and how far it's moved along. I don't know that, like the Thiel crew has a particular program for Europe. I think as you've been sketching here, and again, this is all hypothesis, that Kamala or whatever might win in November, and we'll all be like, shucks. I mean, anyway, that's happened to me before. So I'm not, this isn't a prophecy, it's a hypothesis, but it's one that is informed and there's a reasonable basis for it. Anyway, there's something going on with Europe. I don't think that the Thiel crew necessarily has an explicit program for Europe, but there are things that are being done in Europe that are brought over here. Likewise, there are things that are innovated in the United States and all their horror and that are then exported to Europe. But I bring this up because Biden came in, and one of my takes, I don't know if anybody buys it, but I mean, it's pretty solid as far as I'm concerned. The biggest winner of this Ukraine mess has been China. It's absolutely the biggest winner because we're Britain and the United States, and now preeminently the United States, we're of course an air power, but we're a naval power. What we control is the seas and the trade lanes, and so we can cut people off. That's why we favor this idea of sanctions. And what happened with this Ukraine war is that we drove Russia into China's arms. They used to be competitors. There are all kinds of shows you can watch on my channel where my friend Tim and I, or myself, alone or with guests, often people like Charlemagne, often people like Prude, both of whose channels I recommend. We talked about how there's this whole overland corridor aspect and how China wants the Belt and Road to run across Asia to connect it with Europe and many other places as well. And that Russia is to a considerable extent a competitor to them in this. Why would Russia want to give up this sort of two-headed eagle facing east and west, this massive land corridor? And for the Chinese, it's critical to get access to energy, raw materials for its manufacturing, and logistical corridors that run across Asia, because if they try to go to sea, the one place where we really can clean their clock is anything on the high seas. Less so than previously, but still, it's a clear overmatch. So now suddenly, by pushing Russia into their arms and saying you can't sell to Europe, well, now Russia has been pushed together with China. They have to reach some accommodation as these two hegemons in the Asian landmass, and it's guaranteed energy. Rush to China. It's guaranteed massive amounts of all kinds of raw materials and resources that the Russians have in spades. And it's given China overland logistical corridors for all of this, as well as their exports that are basically not subject to our naval interdiction. It's ridiculous. Like, to think that, yes, the United States gets to sell some more LNG, right? Mm-hmm. So the degree to which China has benefited from this makes me think, just straight out, I'll say it, Biden is Chinese cat's paw. Whether he knows it or not, the people behind him, whether they know it or not, this is, yes. Now, I'm not saying like Alex Jones, the Chi-Coms. There are other people involved. And I'm not saying necessarily that they even know it. They might be stupid enough to have thought that they could take Russia out in this way. And I think for the military-industrial complex, it's a general win because they get to test out their new shit. They get to push and see, well, let's see if Russia really can fight back. It's great to hypothesize, but let's see what happens. And we need to do it every 50 years or so, have a great bloodletting so we can test our shit and figure out, where we draw the dividing lines. That's half the picture. The other half of the picture is that as it has fucked Europe. It has fucked Europe. And so I have to wonder if there was some sort of, and this is interesting, this Michael R. Stoddard guy is saying, so why was 4 years of Biden good? Well, it certainly hasn't been good for Europe. It's been very good for China. It's kind of sucked for us, unless you hold to the idea that the United States wants to keep Europe on a leash. And based on what I've seen from Obama and Clinton and the kind of things that they propose and the way they work with the Brussels and the way they all seem to be one sickening sort of incestuous little hive of manipulators, I think that Europe was beginning to push some things the other way. I'm not saying that Germany controls the US, nothing like that. But I think that there are fantastically wealthy people behind the scenes in the United States and in Europe who want to put into place a program both in Europe and the United States that really is reflected in what you see in Australia, what you see in New Zealand, what you see in Canada, what you see in Britain, and what you see in Europe, and increasingly in the United States. So in terms of if there was a reason to put Biden in addition to having the people in the United States just get some more cold water splashed on their face in terms of what's happening, I think it was just to hammer and smash Europe. Because likewise, you're seeing the Europeans start to say, what the fuck? What the fuck? It's a mess. And so there's some other things going on with Israel and problems with Iran and how that's related to Russia. We don't have to get into it here, but I wanted to sketch some basic ideas about what might be happening so that I can then ask you, what have you heard about these people's foreign policy positions? The Thiel crew, Vance, Trump himself. We've heard things in the past and you've mentioned them. But what's the latest, and what do you think about it?
I would say their foreign policy has been one of the biggest pillars that I identified as soon as I started following these characters and seeing what they're publicly talking about, the direction of they're investing in, the types of people they're supporting, and what they're talking about. The pillars of this was like illegal immigration, DEI, ESG, crypto and AI, deregulation, and China. China is like, and China undergirds a lot of these other issues as well. You've got the Chinese influence with Mexican cartels, which is affected by the illegal immigration, which implicates the illegal immigration issue. China, obviously, in terms of intellectual property and militarily and then technologically, depending upon China for manufacturing, military technology, and all these. China comes up a lot with these people. So one of the interesting, I guess, maybe one of some historical context even further behind what you're talking about is the conflict between Britain and Russia goes back for centuries. They've been like ardent rivals for probably the better part of, 400 years, 300, 400 years at least. And going back further than that, it could be still, and my history isn't that good. But one of the most interesting conflicts between, or one of the most interesting, I guess, flashpoints in this centuries-old conflict between Britain and Russia was the American Civil War. And I just learned this recently, that Russia sent warships to the United States during the American Civil War and stationed them outside for several months. They just parked their warships in the New York harbor and the San Francisco harbor. And the implication here, they sort of had like a diplomatic cover story for why they were there. they were in the middle of dealing with, I believe there was some kind of a labor uprising revolution in Lithuania, I believe. And this was causing the Tsar, it was like some political egg on his face. But there was the possibility that it could turn into an actual larger dispute, larger war if more European countries got involved in it. So there was sort of this cover story where they're withdrawing some of their ships so that they have people who are not immediately implicated in that controversy. But part of it was they were there in support of the Union, because Britain's perspective on the Civil War was it wasn't that they wanted the South to win per se, but they wanted the United States to not become a full formal sovereign entity unto itself. They wanted it to be split up. So by the time of the Civil War, or the war between the states, or whatever you want to call it, Britain hadn't just like laid down and accepted, oh, we lost our prized colonies after the American Revolution. They were still involved. And one of the things they wanted to do was be able to maintain this posture with respect to their colonies, where the colonies provide all the raw materials, the mother country manages the manufacturing and industrialization. But having a colony become industrially competitive to the mother country, so to speak, was a direct threat. So the North was industrializing much more and much faster than the South, and that was one of the economic undertones of the war itself. So Britain had an interest in the South at least forcing a stalemate and maintaining a split polity. Russia, on the other hand, age-old enemy of Britain, wanted to see Britain undermined, and they wanted to be able to effect a little bit of military leverage to protect their interests back home. So they sent their warships to essentially, they're positioned to where if Britain decided to step in overtly to force, peace talks in the Civil War, Russia was there saying, no, we're going to be backing up the Union in this fight. This is a very interesting story I'd never heard about until, I don't remember where I heard it, a few months ago, but it provided some interesting color on this controversy that we're seeing right now, all the warfare with Ukraine and then Israel. Obviously, if you want to talk about the British Empire and the last couple hundred years of the British Empire, you can't do that without talking about Israel and Zionist influence, because, I mean, the way it seems to me is that the British Empire proper was on its downfall after Victoria. Victoria basically, it peaked prior to and during the Victorian era, and it's been on its downfall since then. And it's been parasitized by, I don't know how much I could say this openly on YouTube, but it's been parasitized by a Middle East influence interests. And then it has been, so you've almost got like would it be like a parasite in a host that's then using another entity as its front? This has been the relationship between Israel and Britain and the United States. So then there's an ethnic nature, obviously, to the conflict in Ukraine as well. So all these things are all circulating around here. But one of the big things with Europe is that they aren't able to maintain. Europe is going to maintain a first world country level of standard of living. Europe is going to be dependent upon trade agreements with people to produce their energy and their agriculture. They can't sustain it themselves, which means they're either going to be, it's going to be with the United States, it's going to be with Russia, or it's going to be with Africa. Those are
and we can see that the people currently in power have, I mean, I think I've seen it actually mapped out, this sort of north-south axis with Europe and Africa coming together. And certainly France's little games across West Africa, which are now being thwarted by Russia quite dramatically, were a part of that picture. Someone in the chat said, why would the siliconocrats care about Europe? Any rise in power will just enhance European vassaldom. It's not Europe. It's a group of people with power. And I don't see major divisions between Hillary Clinton, Justin Trudeau, van der Leyen, at the moment, the Tories or the Labour in Britain. I mean, Britain's being screwed because it just basically won't tell the EU that it wants to change some shit with the European Court of Human Rights. So they can't stop the boats. I mean, you just had this Brexit vote where Britain was supposed to leave, and Boris came flying in to do this big dog and pony show of pretending to have Brexit while he made sure that the connections remained as close as possible. And this same program of flooding Europe, and likewise Australia, likewise the United States, likewise Canada, with foreigners has stayed in place. Yes, I think that there are let us say, influences from a plucky and resolute Middle Eastern nation. I think there are also influences from the diaspora that is not necessarily nationalist in that traditional sort of Zionist sense. But I also think we have to confront the reality of the damn Fabian Society, and other organizations like this. And so when you ask, well, what's going on with Europe? They have, I think that there are very wealthy people in the United States and in Europe who stand behind these governments, who have a program that they want to put into place. We've got Caravaggio saying NATO has Europe in a chokehold. Yeah, so what? Who controls NATO? Right. Who controls NATO? I mean, the reality is, what are whatever the U.S. troops stationed in Germany just gonna go out into the streets and tell Germany they can't do things? I mean, yes, the United States has made of Europe a mess, and it is subjugated. But what is the United States, and whose hand is in that puppet? Yes. And I'm not saying that Europe controls the U.S. It's not. The nation state models of thinking in terms of who is responsible for a thing are ridiculous at this point. Yes, the U.S. military is the thing that if you have control over it, you can do certain things. But to be honest with you, lots of people recognize, oh, America has all these guns, citizens have all these guns. What good is it really going to do you if you attempt to go up against the U.S. forces deployed on American soil if there's some sort of problem? Not much. It makes the costs higher, and it makes them more reluctant to do such things because of the mess it would create, but it's not decisive. I shouldn't say that. There are many stages of influence, because I'm contradicting myself earlier saying that violence is decisive. Indeed it is. But I think that it's about self-interest. The idea that NATO controls Europe elides, it passes over sort of in an idiotic way, I think, the fact that the current elite in Europe has its own self-interests served by doing this. Mm-hmm. These people are, yes, American creatures. Well, American creatures in some sense, but it's their own interests. The satraps of the gay or gay, they operate based on their own self-interest. They're perfectly happy with what's happening, and they keep down their own competitors. So anyway, this is getting a little bit too far afield, and there's quite a bit I could say about the business with the war between the states. I'll confine myself to saying I think that Britain had two paths it could take. If the Civil War or war between the states, or the recent unpleasantness there, the War of Southern Independence, whatever it was, if it had gone in the yeah, there it is. God, how could I forget that? I'm going to be kicked out of Alabama for not remembering that. The fact is, I think that they did what they always do, what all of these kind of players do. They make sure that they have a foot in either camp. It's like the Civil War in Sudan right now. It's not one or the other. And so because if the Confederate States did well in the beginning, they looked like they might, then Britain wanted to make sure that they had a foot in the door with that. The thing is that the North won, and that's when you saw the grand rapprochement between Britain and the United States, and that's where you get the Gilded Age, and that's where the Astors are coming over, and that's where Carnegie is a Scotsman, and that's where you get massive investments in the railroad across the U.S. Everyone's like, we railroaded across the country. Yeah, who paid for it? J.P. Morgan. Who was J.P. Morgan working for? Massive British investors. Yes. So When the North came into control, the Brits said, fine, let's go that way. We're going to take over the whole fucking thing. Now, that is not to say that the Americans and other interests didn't get involved. And it's not to say that Britain wasn't fucked by them in the same way that the U.S. is being fucked by them. Anyway, we don't need to go into that. The business of Europe, though, and of foreign, well, I guess we kind of covered as much as we can hypothetically why they might want to crush Europe. Why several factions in the U.S. might want to do that if, in fact, Biden was put in there to make a further mess to clear the way for this change. But again, foreign policy. I've heard from Vance. He seems to be very, very pro-Israel. He went and, leaned on the wall. Photograph it made it look like he was kind of taking a piss, but, not everybody strikes the right posture there. Trump is obviously pro-Israel, but you can see that there's tension with Netanyahu specifically because even the Biden and Obama crew has been trying to remove him with color revolutions. You've got a growing mess with Iran. What have you heard from these people about Iran and Israel?
So the big thing that got a lot of people hot under the collar about Vance was one of the first things he said at the RNC was, he was like, with respect to Iran, he's like, he says, we need to hit him and hit him hard. And a lot of people said, oh, see, there you go. He's a neocon patsy. And I was talking with Pete Quinones about this, that is not like, this is playing the game. This is playing the game. You have like going and kissing the wall. Like, yeah, if you're going to be successful in politics right now at this current time, you're going to kiss the wall. You just have to.
Yeah. Period.
And saying we need to hit Iran and hit them hard. This is, first of all, it's just saying something. And it's saying something at a political rally. Also, the neocon project is not hit them and hit them hard. The neocon project is long, drawn out, sustained sinkholes of money. Hit them and hit them hard is actually kind of calling the bluff. This is the way I read it. And I was talking with Pete about this, that this is saying hit him and hit him hard corresponds with the Trump national security focus, which is we're not going to be getting into all of these different wars. If we do get into a war, we're going to hit them hard, and get out. It's very, very pragmatic. And I've seen this with, I'm trying to remember who I was listening to talking about this just recently, because I'd like to give him credit for it. But they were talking about Trump's relationship to Israel, and that it's very clear that the way Trump relates to them, especially if you see him like talking to Israeli people kind of off the cuff, is he sees them as a powerful political demographic, like he sees evangelicals as a powerful political demographic. And he says, hey, I want to be friends with you. I'm the deal maker. I want to come make a deal with you so that we can be close political allies and we can accomplish stuff together. But he also wants to be the big dog. He doesn't want to be dicked around by other people. He doesn't like it when he gets dicked around by other people. This is why he doesn't like Netanyahu, because Netanyahu tried to big dick him when during early 2021 when Netanyahu congratulated Biden. Incidentally, this I think, just as a little, maybe put a pin in this for future conversation, I think what will wind up being decisive in the election is going to be major foreign leaders recognizing one or the other candidate as the winner. In a similar way to the way the U.S. Is recognizing Maduro's opponent, I think this is going to wind up becoming a thing. And I don't have a specific prediction with respect to it, but I think the way it's going to come down, that's going to play a big role. But back to Israel, the way this is a consistent pattern across a lot of different domains that Trump and now Vance is mimicking. It's very pragmatic. He's not an ideological guy. He's not given over to, I think a lot of us, especially those of us who've trafficked in studying all the different secret societies and histories that we're not allowed to talk about publicly. I think we tend to have a tendency to project our understanding of all of these dynamics into other people as if other people understand them and see them the same way, and then judge their actions accordingly. And I don't think that that's necessarily fair or reasonable or even just prudent to do. Because many of them don't see, like, if they don't see the world the way we do, then you can't judge the decisions that they make according to, as if they see the world the way you do and are making those decisions versus seeing the world differently and making decisions accordingly. So I think that Trump's relationship to Israel has always been one of pragmatism. And he wants to be friends with them and he wants to have a good relationship with them. And this is something that's characteristic of the majority of the technocrats as well. You know, they're still libs, like in their heart and soul, culturally, aesthetically, they're upper class libs who want to, you know, democracy and liberalism and having human rights and free trade and all these things. They want to pay lip service to all these sorts of things. So the only democracy in the Middle East, you know, they have a soft spot for Israel. But they don't believe, they're not the hardened radical ideologue who believes that the only reason that America should exist is to serve the interests of Israel. They see Israel as an ally, that they're like, yeah, you should be strong and you should be able to protect yourself and fight for your interests and you know, we don't want to see you being attacked and slandered in the press. But they can hold this thought with the thought of, we want America to be its own sovereign entity. We want America to be strong. We want America to be economically prosperous. We want to be able to grow and to go do things as Americans. So this goes back to the thing I'd said in the last episode, that I think a useful distinction to make is between the America should exist for the sake of Israel and America should exist and so should Israel. I think this is a real political distinction, that the two factions cannot coexist and will not get along, because the America should exist for the sake of Israel people will eventually drive away from their own coalition the other the America should exist and so should Israel people.
Sorry, I was just taking a look. Someone had claimed that Joe Biden didn't lean on the Wailing Wall, and yeah, unless it's some sort of joke. I just found a photograph in front of him at the wall. Let me just double check and find another one. Okay, that's Pence. Yeah, maybe I'll discover that that it's a fake photograph, but there appears to be a photo of him and a news story, and he was bumping fists with Prime Minister Yair Lapid. Yeah, now maybe it wasn't recently, maybe it's fake, but yeah, it does appear that Biden appeared at the wall and did his little do there as well. Yeah, anyway, whether that's correct or incorrect is it doesn't have much bearing on this. I'm an autist. Yeah, it does seem that basically what you have to recognize, I think you certainly do, but anyone who wants to think about this, Jewish interests, and I do not think that they're entirely uniform. And I believe there's very real competition, which we could see with the Color Revolution State Department sponsored stuff that has been going on in Israel for the last couple of years based on Netanyahu trying to do judicial reforms. The reality is that they have a veto, Jewish interests, however much they may compete. I think they can make certain things happen, but I think they're much more powerful in terms of being able to come in with a veto and just say no. They can put all their money on that thing and it won't happen. And so as a consequence, table stakes, I mean, certainly if you're pragmatic, you know, the way that powerful people work is they look at how to deal with you. They don't need a pissing contest. They don't want to butt chests. They much prefer, as a general rule, to subvert you or to bring you over to their side. They say to themselves, I have no enemies, only unconvinced friends. And also there's the simple question of what you're going to do and the order in which you're going to do it. If you have a massive mess to deal with in the United States, do you want to say, fuck Israel as your first statement out of the gate? Or do you want to say there's a certain block here whose interests I want to recognize and proceed in that fashion? Likewise, if you want to, if you expect that it's very likely you're going to be coming into office and you need to deal with the situation with Israel and Iran, how are you going to improve your negotiating position with Iran by saying that you won't support Israel and saying that we must not attack Iran? I mean, it's just, it's basic shit. Mm-hmm. Now, that is not to say that I'm writing off the possibility that they're entirely, gung-ho for Israel. They most likely are. But now there are other reasons why that serves an American imperial interest, because it's like the pebble in the shoe of the entire Middle East that will make every country there have to limp, because we keep that irritant there, which prevents that geostrategically critical junction of Africa and Europe and Asia from coming together. Not to mention things like the Suez Canal and all the overland routes that are coming into play increasingly. They're almost certainly the Trump administration is going to do what every other administration has done with Israel, although it remains to be seen. They may not be as accommodating specifically to Netanyahu as previous administrations. But for me, my take on Israel is pretty straightforward. I'm such a philo-Semite that I want them to become stronger and stand on their own 2 feet, so they don't have to rely on us at all. And I believe that as the noble people that they are, they should come to certain terms about their misbehavior and return to being the moral lamp of guidance to all of us that they should be. And so I want them to stand on their own 2 feet, and I want them to acknowledge the things that they've done wrong so they can return to that civilizational role of leadership that the chosen people that they are should perform their function as. Now we have Ukraine. J.D. Vance has come in and said very loudly that, we don't need to be in this mess. And Trump doesn't seem to have, any real interest in it. I don't know to what degree he could get around a deeper state military industrial complex that wanted to stay there. But the bottom line, the reality is, this is just speaking pragmatically, I don't think Trump is noble and is going to stop the war just because it's bad. The bottom line is, it's done everything it needs to do. It's soured relations already between Russia and Europe for a generation or more. It's shattered Ukraine, and we're probably going to see Ukraine just means the borderlands. That's what the fucking name of the country means. It means the borderlands. And so we may see a more functional division of Ukraine along the Dnieper, which answers Russia's strategic concerns. And let's just be real. We've emptied all these newly entered into NATO nations' arsenals of all their old Warsaw Pact equipment, which means they're going to have to buy new shit, and they're going to buy a whole lot of it from us. And it's going to be bought on a standard that's 5.56 instead of 7.62. It's going to be 100, I can't remember which one is which. It's going to be 155 millimeter instead of 152 millimeter for artillery. But the point is, they're going to be forced to get better integration there, and they're going to buy their shit from us. And their relationship with Russia has been soured. So now, if Trump wanted to come in, I can see where the military-industrial complex could say, "Yeah, it's fine. We've got a whole new program of what we need to do with drones. We now know what modern warfare looks like. We've taken the rectal temperature of Russia, and we found out that they're still hot and functioning, and we know how far we can push and to what extent. Now let's see if we can wind this down a little bit, and deal with China." So what I'm hearing from Trump and Vance seems to fit with that. Also, if there was a longer term program to kind of smash the current elite within Europe by causing so much difficulty for their populations that they'll be kicked out of office, we're beginning to see that. It's not going to be easy. Since 2016, I've been looking and thinking, Geert Wilders will come in, and oh, Marine Le Pen will come in. And I now know more about those players. I don't have any illusions about how far they're willing to go. Wilders, for example, is just a raving sort of, pro-Israel figure. Le Pen is attempting to make herself more of a pro-Israel figure. But Le Pen has now gotten closer than ever before to, or her Rassemblement National party, is further along. Wilders is in office. AFD is on the rise. And the dissatisfaction in Britain just continues to increase. So I don't think that replacement regimes within Europe, if and when they come, are going to be a great deal better. But I do know that the current regimes have been trying to keep out the ones that are coming in desperately, maybe less so with Wilders, because I think he's actually got a background, or he's got a prime minister or some sort of a cabinet minister who's just like a total spook. But I can't remember completely, and I don't follow Dutch politics closely. But my point is, the people in power in Europe up to the present point have done everything that they can to keep these other players out. So there will be some changes, and there would have to be some changes. So foreign policy, I don't know. Have you heard anything from Thiel or any of these technocrats? Less so Vance, but more these other people, from Silicon Valley and the rest. Have you heard anything from them about foreign policy?
So they're all the American Dynamism crew, the Andreessen Horowitz, a lot of some of the guys with Sequoia Capital, Joe Lonsdale with 8VC, David Sachs. A number of these guys are all, number one, they're very anti the war in Ukraine. They want that to be wrapped up and done and over with. Not because they're actually pretty Russia skeptical too. And I think the Russia skepticism is associated with is both kind of amusingly part of a pro-America sentiment that they have. And Russia is kind of the old, harkening back to the Cold War. They still have a lot of that Russia suspicion, and then Russia being close to China, which is the focus of a lot of their suspicion from the technocrat perspective. The Peter Thiel did make have an interesting interview just recently on trigonometry, and he was talking. It wasn't directly about foreign policy, but kind of obliquely has implications for it. He said, it was in the context of AI, and he said, you have on one hand, you have the concern of like the Skynet narrative, that you're going to have the runaway AI monster that takes us oppresses us all with robots. And then on the flip side, you have the rise of the nanny state regulatory capture apparatus that is implemented because of the ostensible feared rise of Skynet. And he said, because everybody is talking about the danger of Skynet, and they're not talking about the danger of the nanny state apparatus. Basically, if he was in our circles, he probably would have just said the longhouse. Since you're not talking, people are not talking about that, you should be afraid of the nanny state, the global, the globalist government nanny state that wants to abuse us in a whole bunch of different ways. That's the true concern. That's the true fear, and not that people are going to run away, innovate Skynet that's going to become, sentient and put us all into slave camps. So I think you can kind of read into some political or some foreign policy preferences, I think, from that statement. That number one, he is not a friend whatsoever to the Davos EU coalition, and he's been very outspoken against them a lot of times, especially when he goes over to Europe. He goes to Oxford. He's pretty sharply critical of the EU, and then China has been a consistent focus of his concern. Thiel, in particular, has been outspokenly concerned about China and their trajectory and the U.S.'s relationship to them for, I'd say, probably at least 10 years. And interestingly, a little tidbit related to Zuckerberg we were talking about a while ago. Zuckerberg, obviously, I believe his wife is Chinese. And there was a sharp pivot that he made where he was very pro-China, like we need to be friends with China, we need to open up, we need to trade, all this stuff, very kind of typical State Department lib perspective. And then Peter Thiel all of a sudden came out like with his hair on fire talking about China in 2018 and 2019 in alignment with Trump. And shortly thereafter, Zuck made almost a complete about face, and he was testifying before Congress and talking about China being like having, I'm pretty sure he said that Google was full of Chinese spies, and that this is an urgent national security concern. This was in his Notorious, where he has like the really awkward like water drinking scene and all that. But China has been the one of the key issues for these technocrats for a long time. And I think a lot of that has to do with them being technocrats and that directly implicating that. And then as we've been laying out, China representing the East, and then America kind of is the West, and Europe is kind of caught in this tug of war. So it's hard to evaluate any of these in isolation because they all implicate each other. Actually, another foreign policy thing would be kind of obliquely again, would be Bukele and El Salvador. Because similar to the calculus we kind of went through to ascertain that very obviously Elon Musk has very powerful people backing him. There's no way he would be able to sustain everything that he does without having a tremendous amount of support from powerful people. Bukele is the same on a smaller level, but still significant, because it's very obvious that the State Department is not happy about the existence of Bukele. Like the whole NGO network that forms the backbone of the regime, they're not happy about Bukele. Him existing is a gigantic middle finger shoved into their eye. But somehow he was able to come into power and navigate through a lot of various quickly changing political circumstances and consolidate power in a way that would require him to be backed by somebody with the capacity to stand down the regime, to stand down the State Department, the CIA, Davos, whoever else might have an interest in subverting El Salvador. And because once his example actually takes root, it becomes a really powerful mimetic example that can become an inspiration to other Central American leaders, or to just other leaders in general around the globe. And he's also beginning to position himself as like the Silicon Valley outside of Silicon Valley. He wants El Salvador to be the Bitcoin nation. And there's a lot of potential power associated with that. And I think we're moving in a direction where the nation state is starting to transform into some sort of a combination of geographical nation state governance, but it's going to be merged with a more non-geographical network state type of. And I know I said governance, and you have your thing about the term governance that I've thought of every single time I've said it or read it ever since then. But we're moving into an evolution of there's going to be a new way that human beings arrange themselves and draw boundaries between our relationships. This is going to evolve to reflect the fact that the digital frontier isn't going away. There's not going to be a barring, a comet hitting the planet and sending us back to the Stone Age. There's not going to be a dissolution of the digital space. In fact, it's going to become even more populated and even more ever present in our lives. And it's kind of anyone's guess exactly what that's going to look like. A lot of people have different theories, but by definition, we're going to have to go through it to discover what it is. But I do think that El Salvador is going to be at the forefront of that. And it very clearly, Bukele has backing from people who have a lot of the same interests as the people who are now moving to back Trump. So, and then the relationship between Trump and Bukele is very interesting as well, because you can see a patron-client relationship being established where Trump's going to come out and he's going to big dick Bukele, and Bukele's we're going to be the Bitcoin country, and Trump's like, no, America's going to be the Bitcoin country. And then
and there was another statement like that. Sorry, just very quickly. I remember Trump just recently said something where he was like, "There's some guy who says that it's such and such," but he didn't name him, but he kind of slapped him.
Yep.
So I guess
at the
that's
same time that he was
big dog,
publicly
small
doing
dog.
that. while he was publicly taking shots at him, Matt Gaetz and some other like close Trump allies were traveling to El Salvador and meeting with Bukele. They were accepted as honored guests and given tours and doing a big press tour and everything. So everyone freaked out about Trump going after Bukele. Oh, people he's listening to and yada yada yada. And I was like, this is a total nothing burger. And in fact, it's actually kind of interesting watching the way the kayfabe and the power politics. The way the power politics are kind of playing out here in public in this drama, where Trump is coming in as the big dog, and he doesn't want to be seen as somehow influenced by or subservient to or inspired by Bukele, because that doesn't fit the Trump persona. So Trump is going to come in, he's going to lay his dick on the table, and Bukele properly is going to respond as a client does, which is, yes, sir, you're the best, sir. All of my great ideas are your great ideas, sir, and then they're going to establish a good working relationship that now I think could blossom into something pretty interesing, when you get into
hopefully
and all that.
Oh, yeah, I was about to say, hopefully the repatriation of any number of El Salvadorans, because it's such a lovely, who wouldn't want to enjoy the beaches and the cocktails, right?
Right.
Love you, bye. Yeah, I agree with you, because we've seen Trump say, what? Project 2025? I don't even know what that is, and it has no influence on me, and Bukele, who the fuck is Bukele? And then we have Thiel saying, I'll vote for him if you put a gun to my head, but I'm not giving him any money this time. There's quite a bit of that, and it does seem to be a surface treatment, if indeed it is anything more than your basic point, which is, who would expect anything different from Trump's personality? Like, what? Right. Someone helped me, fuck, this kind of thing. Well, I think there's one last thing I want to mention, and to get your thoughts on, and in addition, I just wanted to find out, if there's any further remarks or anything else you wanted to cover. I guess I should ask you that before I jump to this last point, because I think this last point is a good, interesting closing one. But I've sort of pushed this here and there, and I don't know if you've had enough room to cover things, everything that you wanted to in this stream. So please, if there's anything you missed, take your time and share it now.
I guess I would say, number one, regarding the Project 2025 thing, just go look at the Project 2025 list of priorities with the Agenda 47 list of priorities, and it's such a classic example of, you have the big ask that is really extreme, that then serves as a foil to your oh no, the Project 2025 stuff, that's crazy. I have my Agenda 47 stuff, which is 80% of Project 2025, and then all the people associated with Project 2025 are all are very close Trump loyalists who are very actively have been involved with him, have been close to him for a long time. So that whole thing has been a nothing burger to me for a long time. I do think that there are people who are around Trump. I think Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita are probably not very trustworthy, and I think they do want to be they want to push Trump to disavow that, and he may even be disavowing it because they're telling him to. But I'm saying, in effect, in the long run, it's not going to matter. The way I expect this to play out, and it's how it actually goes, is anyone's guess. So I'm going to just kind of paint in broad strokes here. But this technocratic culture that has moved itself behind Trump has begun to normalize and mainstream Trump support. That's not just going to go away. And many of these men have put themselves at great personal risk, whether economic or social or even legal risk, potentially, because there's no doubt that them going out on a limb like this and donating tons and tons of money to Trump and backing these different initiatives, there's no way that this isn't going to put them square in the Peter Navarro, Steve Bannon sights. They're going to get the same treatment as those guys did if Trump does not wind up being the president after all the rigmarole. So there's a very, very strong incentive from a lot of these people who swing they swing a lot of institutions. They swing a lot of public opinion, and bring a lot of money with them and their own interests that we've discussed at length who are backing them. They're not just going to lay down and just accept, whatever the regime tries to put forth. There's going to be a conflict. There's going to be a big brouhaha. My prayer is that it doesn't go hot, that it stays in the lawfare arena. But I think it's probably going to drag out. I think it's probably going to be much more like 2000 than it is like 2020. But the thing that I think is the most important for all of us is to realize that regardless of whether or not these are our guys, whatever agendas or policies they want to pursue, no matter what, the most important thing, regardless of the outcome, is that we have local networks and that we're building up local action committees, local resource groups, local support networks. We need to have local infrastructure. We need to be creating these networks and building these projects now. We need to have been building them, years ago. But in either case, if Trump wins and these guys are ready to clear the field of their opponents to give them room, space to operate, to begin building and innovating and, just grilling as billionaires do, that's going to open up space for us to move into. And we need to have the infrastructure available to take advantage of that space. If, on the flip side, whatever regime candidate, because I still have my doubts that it's going to be Kamala, whatever regime candidate, if that's the patsy that ends up being the winner after all of it, then we're going to need that local infrastructure and those local networks, because we're going to be under fire. We're going to have to keep living. Like, life is going to go on. Time is going to go on. We're going to have to keep getting by. And, we're going to have to retrench ourselves and try to figure out a way to press forward. But in all of that, we're going to need strong, personal, local networks that we can trust, that we can use for accumulating our own social and political capital. So I want to keep harping on this so that people don't get solely fixated on this one event in time as we get closer and closer to it and lose the ability to see beyond it.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I agree entirely. The number of things that really do just come down to whether or not you have a network of friends around you, that you share certain necessary basic values with. The number of things that come down to that are, it's a large number. It's can you go do what you need to do because someone you can trust will come and watch your kids. It means, can I get this extension of my house built because I can call some friends, buy, a case of beer, and we can raise these walls together and, nail them together and make sure they're plumb and square and put a roof on. It means if a bunch of people, bad people are at your house to do bad things to you, whether it's, your putative government or, non-government actors, you can call people who will come and support you, of course, civilly and lawfully in all ways and at all times. These things they're what really matter. I'm confronted with that now. I do all this shit online, and I'm like, I need to know people near me. So as a part of my furtherance of that, I'm going to stop at every house that has a fresh honey sold here sign. I'm going to stop at every house that says fresh eggs sold here. And I'm just going to get to know everybody in that respect, and find out where I can get chicken and cow manure for my garden, and find out where I can buy eggs, and then get to know these people, so that, and then you move from there. You don't show up like some sort of psychopath, like the Jews, you're like, no, I want to buy eggs, Hi, nice to meet you. So I agree with that very, very much. It's, cultivate your own backyard. So the last thing just a quick thought, I was thinking to myself last night, and, shit with like Yarvin came to mind about, monarchism and all this kind of stuff. And then I was thinking about figures like Bukele, and the terror of Trump is that he will destroy democracy, the kind of shit that you hear from the shit libs. And I was just thinking about it. I'm like, it's obvious. I've thought about this many times, but I just connected the dots. Like everyone's worried about, if some great, more monarchical figure, whether it's the CEO flavor or the great man of history flavor. I'm not making any claims one way or another about what that is. I think Trump certainly is more on the CEO side. But we've never really had democracy here, or we've had it limited scale at the level of states until they were gutted. And, then we have it at the limited scale of local activities, but it's really been an oligarchy. It's certainly been an oligarchy since the end of the Civil War. And so, everybody's like, well, we'll have some monarch come. And I think to myself now, there is no, this is obvious. Most of the elite theory, Pareto, Mosca, and these people they talk about, it really is an oligarchy, and quote unquote democracy is just the purest vehicle for an oligarchy. It's like, if you want an oligarchy, then what you need, friend, is a democracy. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's not really a thing about replacing democracy with a single strong figure. It's replacing an oligarchy with a single strong figure, with a strong executive. Deep state is just, it's a bureaucracy and an oligarchy. These things somehow tied together, and I guess we're going to get to this point now where it's a matter of, there's nothing really that needs to be changed. There's nothing about our system that requires changing. You could shift the emphasis to the strong executive and without changing the democracy, because it's always been a fiction. Mm-hmm. And you got the bureaucracy and the oligarchy because they're in the way of someone being responsive and responsible. It's simply a matter of acknowledging that the whole idea of democracy has been a kind of opiate of the masses. I used to have that as my my pinned tweet, because there's the old Marx thing, religion is the opiate of the masses. No, these days this absurd idea that we really determine the things at that level. But I guess I wanted to throw that out there. It's no great insight. It's all obvious. But, at a certain point, you have a number of things that intellectually, and it just kind of clicks at the end. Anyway, that underscores, I think, your point about the areas where you do have control, where you can exercise discretion and shape your world around you. And it's at the level of your family, friends, and loved ones, and how you make those things work in communities, because we're increasingly atomized with all this digital stuff. There's a lot of great things where we're not. I can talk to you, or I can, have a drink, as I probably will later tonight, probably too many, with D on one of his spaces or something. But we do need those communities individually and as groups in our own little local areas. And I hope everyone will follow your advice in pursuing that, because it's absolutely true. If we want to take advantage of what really is just going to be a little 4-year window, then we need to do that. And we should have been doing it yesterday. And if we're not going to see that little 4-year window open up for us and our interests, we're definitely going to need a support network in that respect, not least economically, because this shit is a mess. Anyway, that's my final thought. I'll leave the final word to you, other than to say thank you very, very much for coming on. It's been a great discussion as always, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Oh yeah, this has been great. One of my favorite phrases lately has been the term "managed democracy." It was I think the origin of it was a video game called Helldivers, which had some great graphics that came out of it. So it had a great aesthetic. But when Tucker Carlson interviewed Bukele, very, very, very good conversation. If you haven't listened to it, anybody out there, absolutely go listen to it. Bukele made the point that, he talked about democracy. He said, democracy is great. Like, I think America is evidence of how great, how democracy can work. But it has its shortcomings. It has to be maintained. And he used this analogy that when they started working on all these different public works projects, he had there was this one place where there was these houses that were built, and then there was a hillside, and the hillside was sloughing away, and so his whatever domestic infrastructure projects minister had set to building a wall there to try to prevent this from sloughing away. And Bukele was like, why are you doing that? Why not just build like a wall somewhere else? Or sorry, why don't you just build new housing somewhere else? Because if you build this wall here, you're now like from a legal standpoint, like you're inviting this liability on us now that we have to maintain this wall. And if the wall falls down, then we're going to be held responsible for that happening. And he said he was analogizing to our current system. Our it's not that we need to attack this democratic system or tear it down. No, quite the contrary. Actually, we need to build it up. It needs to be maintained. It needs to be managed. And so then that puts the question then who manages the democracy? Who is maintaining the democracy? And who's maintaining it in such a way that it can actually thrive? And when people talk about democracy this way, especially the normies, I've realized that they're not saying like, they're not thinking of voting. They're not thinking of like this thing where like you have the mass public opinion determine how things go. When they say democracy, what they mean is government that is representative of the interests of the people. And I think that there's kind of a, I don't know, like a rhetorical Aikido move that you can pull here where you say, yes, democracy is very good. We need our democracy to be properly managed. And right now it isn't properly managed. So we need new and better managers to come in and manage our democracy for us. Now, this isn't an end in itself. It's not that, oh, if you just get the right managers, then you make the system work and that's all we need. And we get the right people in there and we dust off our hands and move on. No, this is the fundamental conservative shortcoming that conservatives seem to think that there's a way that you can just engineer just the right system, set up just the perfect constitution or what have you, and spin it up, set it running, and then go on with your life. But no, you actually are going to have a civic responsibility. Statesmanship is a discipline that has to be cultivated in the people. And as you said at the top of the hour or at the top of the show, it doesn't matter what system you have. What matters is the people within that system. So at this given time right now, we have to be anti-democratic is kind of like being anti-Israel politically. You're just neutering yourself. But you can be pro-democratic. We're actually very pro-democratic, unlike the Democrats. The Democrats have the name, but they're not representing it right. We're pro-democratic. We believe our democracy needs to be managed. It needs to be managed so that it's our democracy. It's not their democracy.
Right. We need authority and
yes.
responsibility and accountability, but real authority to do what is necessary to protect our democracy. And just as I said with Israel, I'm a major philo-Semite, just as I am a lover of democracy. I want them to stand on their own feet. They shouldn't have to rely on us because I care that much about them. And they should confront their, negative aspects from the past, just as we should, so that they can return to being a guiding light for all the nations as the chosen people. Democracy, we need someone to execute our will, with the authority that we have given them. Yeah, absolutely.
And this whole thing something
changing the system.
Yarvin made this point when he was talking to Charlie Kirk, which was surreal. This is back in, I think, like January or something. Listening to Yarvin talking to Charlie Kirk was actually kind of redeemed Charlie Kirk for me a little bit. But Charlie was like misunderstanding him. He kept saying, well, he's like, I like some of the stuff you're saying, but I don't know if we should throw out the Constitution. And Yarvin was like, no. I'm not saying throw out the Constitution. And this is here, I think, where we can kind of we can redeem the boomer cons a little bit. He said, no, the Constitution is actually a brilliant document. The brilliance of the Constitution is that you can kind of turn it and look at it in just the right way, and you can see, oh, look at this. There's a justification for bringing in a powerful executive to perform the duties of the executive branch and treat the other branches as advisory. And so this is basically the Yarvin kind of prescription for, as he's theory selling about this. But I think there's a legit potential for that. We're going to get some sort of watered down version of it, but a restoration of executive authority that says for 4 years, I'm going to subject myself to an election in 4 years. And for the next 4 years, I'm going to treat the other two branches as advisory. And we're going to set about restoring American democracy. And this is very similar to Bukele's project, where he's there, he's received the mandate from the people, an overwhelming mandate. So now he's free to act autocratically because he has the stamp of approval from the people. And then he's going to subject himself to an election. And I think it'll be real funny when we see what happens with if he goes about trying to amend the Constitution, because he has the mandate for it, to amend the Constitution to be able to run to continue as the president, or maybe become the emperor, or whatever new title he wants to accord himself. Anyways, that was my
Salvador.
Yeah, right.
Like El Salvador, the Empire of El Salvador. I love it. It's like that fucking big. Yeah. Right. Yes. Well, yeah, this is excellent conversation. I want to make sure that everyone listening looks at the links below, not only to buy my shit. Somebody posted here, did Oliver have to put in a wine cellar having brought the frog in? And no, it's butter, man. It's butter. So buy my shit. I must pay for it. Yes. But likewise, there are 2 links provided below. One is for Matt's YouTube channel. Please consider heading over there and subscribing, and also follow him over on Twitter. I do. Consider following me on Twitter. I'm on BitChute. I have a second channel here with old content called A Safer Space on YouTube. Follow me on Telegram, all that shit, and some mo shit too. Thank you all for joining us. My thanks again to Matt. And until next time, let me move this so I don't knock it over. Until next time, I am Semigog, and I am out.